$250 million for meals that never hit a plate. Feeding our future, feeding luxury estates. Shell companies, fake kids, Mercedes and mansions, while the auditors shrugged and the checks kept advancing. Housing grants, Medicaid, autism meals on parade. Frauds, roulette and flying in, $500 million, try 9 or more, they say. 90+ charge, conviction stacking high. Kids went hungry while the grifters took the sky. But they swear there's no voter fraud, not a single dirty vote, while the rest of the system's drowning in a money boat. High tax Minnesota, third highest rates we pay. Crime ain't even the worst, yet they still take it away. Look how silly the taxes, look how silly the trust, when the surplus vanishes and the fraud is a must. $18 billion surplus, biggest in the books. They spent it on new programs and permanent hooks. One-time check for some, permanent growth for the rest. Now the forecast shows shortfalls while the fraudsters get dressed. Roads could have been fixed, schools could have been strong, tax cuts for the people who've been carrying along a second home down south or boats on the lake. Instead we funded fake meals and the next big take. But they swear there's no voter fraud, not a single dirty vote, while the rest of the system's drowning in a money boat. High tax Minnesota, third highest rates we pay. Crime ain't even the worst, yet they still take it away. Look how silly the taxes, look how silly the trust, when the surplus vanishes and the fraud is a must. Vouching on election day, trust us, it's secure. Meanwhile, the nutrition program couldn't keep the door. Same state, same leaders, same nothing to see. One system's sacred, the other's free money for free. 18 billion could have bought a whole lot of sense. Instead we got mansions and a budget that's tense. No fraud at the polls, they chant it so loud, while the rest of the ledger's under a fraud cloud. High taxes, low trust, and a system so sly, Minnesota's laughing all the way to the sky.
Oh, very good. Very good.
You're fascinating to talk to.
Thanks, everybody. You guys are the best.
Join Center of the American Experiment on Saturday, September 19th for our 2026 fall briefing featuring Byron York. Byron York is the chief political correspondent for the Washington Examiner, but you probably know him from his frequent appearances on Fox News. York will give us an update on the race to control the U.S. House and Senate, and will show how Minnesota fits into the 2026 electoral map. Will President Trump beat the odds and grow his power in Congress? Or will Democrats take over and throw Washington into gridlock? Join us at the beautiful winery at Sovereign Estate to hear York's timely message. Plus, enjoy great views, conversation, and food and drink. Tickets are going fast, and we do expect this event to sell out. Get your tickets now at americanexperiment.org/events. That's americanexperiment.org/events.
So, little pre-show here. Had a couple of things that have happened this morning already, so I figured, you know what? Let's start a little bit early as people arrive to the Thursday edition of the show. So, you know that this is at least the excuse that I'm going to give. You know that, like, I'm getting more comfortable with the amazing new arrangements here when I get overconfident. I've talked about this before, right? So two things happened. One, we went to go start the live stream early with the parody songs, and I clicked start for the stream to go, count it down, and we're kind of trucking along doing our thing, and then I realized that I failed to go and do the connection for all of the various streaming outlets that we stream to, whether it's on Mixlr or at americanexperiment.org on Facebook and YouTube. So we had to stop it, had to connect everything and restart it. Before that happened, though, you're not aware of this yet. Good morning to producer Devin as we get ready to kick off the show this morning. Did you watch The Office at all?
I haven't.
You haven't watched The Office?
I need to.
All right, you need to get in on that.
Yes.
Okay. So there is an infamous Office episode where the intern at the time, Ryan, ends up creating a fire in the break room.
I've seen that clip.
Okay, yeah, right, that's right. There's Ryan started the fire. So I went out. I went out to get my cup of coffee. Right. If you watch the live stream, you see me enjoy my coffee. So what I do is I have a whole routine because I'm a man of routines. And so I went over and I went into the break room, and the Keurig coffee machine's there, and I got my little coffee pot, and I put it in and I set it up, and I walked out. After refilling, I refilled the entire water container for the coffee so that anybody else that wants to enjoy coffee later today at least won't have to go and do what I did. So I went and used the restroom, and I came back to a mess because I failed to actually take the coffee cup and put it underneath where it dispenses the coffee. Yeah. There's some machines that won't even start if you don't do that. Like, I don't think mine at home. I think mine at home will stop. This one, clearly not. So took a look. Thankfully, I was running way ahead of schedule this morning, so I was able to go ahead and clean it up appropriately. But yeah, that was the start to my Thursday. Go ahead and make it official. It is the John Justice Show presented by American Experiment. Of course, you can listen to the show at americanexperiment.org on the Mixlr app. You can watch at MN Think Tank on X, Facebook, and YouTube at Center of the American Experiment. My page is there as well. Remember, as the Minnesota State Fair gets underway today, so good morning to all the fairgoers this morning. We will be there live the entire day. Well, not there live. Let me rephrase that. We're not doing the show there. We will be there. Center of the American Experiment will be there all day Saturday. I will be in the booth between 11 and 1 o'clock, and hopefully the majority of our Freedom Friday guests will be there as well. Tomorrow, we will have a full house. So Grace Keating and Katherine Johnson, they've both been traveling with other folks here from American Experiment this week, but they will be back tomorrow for Freedom Friday on the comfy chairs and sofa, and also RNC committeeman A.K. Kamara and Representative Max Reimer in on tomorrow's show. So make your plans to join us at the Minnesota State Fair on Saturday, 11 to 1. And I have to assume I didn't have time. I had a lot of stuff to get to today. I'm really excited about today's show. Got a lot of news stories developed overnight. There was a raid that took place in Savage. Alpha News had previously reported on suspicious activity of a particular home, residents expressing their concern, and that home was raided yesterday by federal officials. We'll give you details on that. It's a full court press to bring Operation Metro Surge back to the top of mind of voters. Clearly, this is a strategy by the Democrats to try to exploit what happened here in Minnesota because they have nothing to run on, and I have further examples of that to share on the show today. A lot of education news to dive into, so lots to get to on today's show. But it is the start of the fair today. I have to assume, and we talked about this a bit yesterday, but I have to assume that there are those individuals that it must be a tradition for them to be there on the first day, right when it opens up. Right. We were talking about rope dropping theme parks yesterday. So I believe it opens at 9 this morning. So I think people are there this early. Gotta be. People have got to be there this early, I bet. But happy opening of the 2026 Minnesota State Fair today. If you're traveling to the fair this morning or on the road and want to leave us a comment about going to the fair on its opening day, you can do so on the Blaster line, 612-584-4565, 612-584-4565 to leave us an audio message, a comment for the show. You can also email john.justice@americanexperiment.org. I would imagine going there on the opening day of the Minnesota State Fair would be a pretty unique and cool deal. You get everything kind of fresh. You're going to have the most energy coming from the workers at the fair, the various booths and services. You know, everything is set up pristine and ready to go. So I imagine today will be a big day at the fair. So we'll see what kind of records we get and how many gang members end up showing up. It's another fun wrinkle. You know, they made a safety zone inside the Minnesota State Fair. Maybe they ought to just make a rumble zone. Is there an area where they can go and just cordon off, and rather than go through all of this ridiculous nonsense of putting forward court orders and legitimizing gang members through various meetings, and because you don't want them to come to the Minnesota State Fair and fight, maybe we just make an area and we let them rumble. Back at my former employer, Devin. Talk to the guys over at KFAN, and maybe they can go and moderate. Maybe Paul Allen could be the announcer. Get the names of the gang members of the Muddy and the Ville, and he could treat it like a sporting event. See, I'm just filled with ideas this morning. Didn't say they were good, just said they were ideas. Yesterday, more tragic news broke, which has a lot of people asking who's next, because typically the way the universe works is that this happens in threes, unfortunately. Of course, we had the passing of Dolly Parton earlier this week at the age of 80. Actor Tim Curry also passed away this week at the age of 80. Different scenario. I mean, we know now that Dolly Parton was dealing with some cancer issues, but Tim Curry had suffered a stroke not too long ago that put him in a wheelchair, and he was in a really bad way. I'd seen some recent interviews. It was interesting. I kind of stumbled across some recent interviews over the course of the past year where I hadn't seen or heard from him in a while, and it was really sad. This is an actor who I very much respect. I probably have more fandom when it comes to Tim Curry than I do Dolly Parton, even though Dolly Parton was clearly an American icon, right? A much bigger celebrity than Tim Curry is. But for me, in my wheelhouse, Tim Curry on a number of different roles. The Rocky Horror Picture Show would be the first one that comes to mind. That was a big deal when I was a kid. I would go down with my buddies to the screenings down in Southern California. There was one, and I can't remember the area. It wasn't Malibu. I know it wasn't Malibu. But there was another sort of beachfront area with some inlet waterways where there was a movie theater. And they would show Rocky Horror Picture Show on Friday nights. And so the friends and I, going back to, again, the dark years of the 90s that I've talked about so often as of late, we would go down there and partake in that. But also, two of my favorite films of all time in two different genres, political techno thrillers. Hunt for Red October is one of my most favorite films of all time. And he had a role in that and was fantastic. Also Legend. fantastic playing the devil in Legend. And again, he suffered a stroke in 2012, put him in a wheelchair, passed away yesterday at his home in Los Angeles, according to his longtime manager. No cause was disclosed. But again, if you'd seen any footage of Tim Curry as of late, you know that he was in a bad way. Known for his arc humor and a putty-like face and a gift with voices, Curry earned 3 Tony nominations for Spamalot, My Favorite Year, and Amadeus with an Emmy nod in 1994. And then just a quick note here from Newsmax. Burst onto the scene as the Transylvanian Frankenfurter in the sci-fi cross-dressing musical, The Rocky Horror Picture Show, which premiered in 1973 at the Royal Court Theatre in London. He went with it to Broadway and then starred in the 1975 cult classic alongside Barry Bostwick, Meatloaf, and Susan Sarandon. He had actually separated himself from any commentary around the Rocky Horror Picture Show for a long time, declined to discuss it until later years, ended up sort of embracing the cult fandom of what that film had eventually become. His credits also included starring as the child-killing monster in the 1990 miniseries also in the Three Musketeers in 93 as well. So again, an individual who I was a huge fan of and just sad to see, but also at the same time, he's probably in a better place given what he had been dealing with. So rest in peace, both Dolly Parton and Tim Curry. And again, I hope this is not another example of things happening in threes. I know, right? Keeping with the theme, though, the next tropical storm that develops in the Atlantic this hurricane season is actually going to be named Dolly, but the timing is pure coincidence. Now, not if you go and check in with Candace Owens, who believes that all of this is tied to Israel. Them's are just jokes. I saw a meme about that yesterday, and it really made me laugh. It has no connection with her death. They go in alphabetical order when it comes to the storms. Storm systems are named by procedures set by the World Meteorological Organization and lists the names. And the lists of names are reused every 6 years. For the Atlantic region, the lists are alphabetical, and they alternate male and female names. Well, who are you to decide whether a storm identifies as a male or female? Come on. It's not very woke. The season started with Tropical Storm Arthur coming to shore in the U.S. on the Gulf Coast in June. Tropical Storm Bertha dumped rain in Louisiana and Texas in July. And Tropical Storm Cristobal formed and quickly dissipated in the Atlantic earlier in August. One name from the 2025 season was actually retired, and that was the name of Melissa, which was a Category 5 hurricane that brought devastation to the Caribbean, and therefore I think they end up retiring the name if it ends up being like a really, really bad storm and they don't want anything else associated with it. I believe that's the reason why they go and they retire the name. So when you see the next hurricane pop up and it's named Dolly, it's not because somebody was trying to be clever. It wasn't because somebody was trying to be cute. It was just because the next one was a female, and it also happened to be the next in order from the Meteorological Society. Let's get to some of your thoughts. Oh, and somebody got it for me. Thank you. 612-584-4565, 612-584-4565.
Hey, John, this is Mike from Clearwater. I was a Marine station in California in Tustin at the helicopter base there, and we used to go down to the Balboa Theater in Newport Beach on the weekends in the 80s to watch the Rocky Horror Picture Show. So maybe that's the area you went.
That is 100% what it was. It was Balboa. That's where it was. You're absolutely right. Cool little area, by the way. Also, Balboa featured prominently in the In Excess video for Devil Inside. So there you go. Little trivia for those of you that are familiar with that song. Great tune. Want to say early 90s. Want to say 91, 92 for that particular track. Let's go and hear from another friend of the show.
Hey, good morning, John. Random guy, Greater Minnesota. Good show so far. rest in peace, Dolly. You will be sorely missed. Tim Curry, rest in peace as well. Does this mean the It Clown's dead now too? Tell me the It Clown's dead now too, John? Maybe he's taking the Democrat platform with him? No. All right. Have a good day.
We're going to discuss this later on. Thank you both for the blast this morning at 612-584-4565. We're going to discuss this a little bit further, specifically what he was referring to about the Democrat platform. Faith in Politics podcast hosted by Mike Slater. My father turned me on to this podcast, and it's fantastic. He does them daily. They're relatively short. They're usually like 15 minutes, maybe 20, but just good, solid nuggets of commentary and insight. He had one about a week ago that I actually listened to on the drive-in this morning, talking about the differences between the Democrats and the DSA. And he articulated a point that is spot on that I want to extrapolate off of a little bit later on relating to the stories. I won't bury this. We'll get into this further in further detail. But basically what he said was that Democrats and the DSA, Democrat Socialists of America, they both want the same thing. They both want communism. It's just the established Democrats, those have been in office for a while, we'll say the last decade or so, right? Give or take. And everybody and all the Democrats that came before those Democrats had been attempting to push the country towards communism slowly, right? Just slowly turning up the heat to make it more acceptable to the American public. What the DSA wants is exactly the same thing, but they want it right now. Their goals are exactly the same. It's just how quickly can they get there. Now, this is obviously causing a lot of consternation for the Democrats as a whole because, as I mentioned, they've been taking a tactic of slowly implementing these policies, which, you know, does provide the opportunity for Republicans to pull back when they get in office, pull back on it. But you know how this works. Every time there is a shift in terms of majorities, you know, it swings one way and then usually it swings farther left. And then when Republicans get in office, they can bring it back a little bit to the right. But then when Democrats get back in the office, they swing it even further left. And this has been going on for decades upon decades. The DSA now, they want everything the Democrats have been trying to do for decades, but they want to do it right now. And there's an extension to this that I'll talk about, and this is the part that you'll have to wait on when we get into it later on. But the reality is the Democrats created this mess on their own. It's the Democrats that have been slow walking the country to communism that created the new generation of Democrats that want the communism and they want it right now. So it was a fantastic point that really, you know, put me down a path and provided, for me, further clarity as to what's actually happening right now with the Democrat Party. So we'll get into that a little bit later on in the show. Again, 612-584-4565 if you want to leave a blast, and you can email john.justice@americanexperiment.org. Yesterday, a Boston federal judge lifted her remaining block on the key portions of Trump's executive order seeking to tighten the mail-in voting rules ahead of the midterm elections. We, of course, talked about this at length yesterday. So it was U.S. District Judge Indira Talwani's decision. And this comes 2 days after the Supreme Court stayed the previous ruling from Talwani that blocked the Trump administration from implementing portions of the order. The development allows the U.S. Postal Service to move forward now with new requirements for mail ballots in federal elections, even as the Democrat-led states challenge the new rule in a separate lawsuit. Yeah, the lawsuits are flying all over the place regarding this. And so hopefully the courts move through quickly. And I just don't see a lot of validity in these lawsuits, considering that even this judge who put the block in has lifted that block, saying, I got nowhere to go. The Supreme Court ruled on this. So I don't know what basis these lawsuits are happening beyond just appeasing the broken and the brainwashed base on the left as Democrats attempted to go and exploit the Supreme Court's decision for their own political advantage and scare individuals into voting coming up in November. The 6-3 decision on Monday by the Supreme Court marked an interim victory for Trump, but it doesn't resolve the order's underlying legality and the other issues the Supreme Court hasn't ruled on yet. So in March, just as a recap, Trump signed this executive order directing DHS to create and distribute state citizenship lists, identifying residents who are U.S. citizens and will be at least 18 years old by the next federal election. Now, the left's trying to take advantage of that and exploit state citizenship lists. There's no credibility to it. There's no reality to it. They just want their base of voters scared. And so they take things like state to citizenship lists and they go, oh, they're making a list. This is what Gestapos do. This is what authoritarian dictators do. No, they're state citizenship lists. We should have a list of individuals that are legally here in the country. We have rules against those who are illegal in the country, and there's nothing nefarious about this at all. Not the case if you talk to a Democrat, though. A separate provision directed by the U.S. Postal Service establishes new procedures for mail-in and absentee ballots in federal elections. Last Friday, the United States Postal Service issued a final rule establishing new standards for the mail-in ballots in federal elections. Now, under that rule, election officials would have to submit to voters' names, addresses, and unique ballot envelope barcodes through the federal portal before handing the ballots over to the Postal Service. Ballots in violation would be rejected and returned to the authorized ballot mailer. Todd Blanche, Attorney General, says the Department of Justice is ready to fight the states that are suing over securing in these mail-in ballots. He was talking to Fox News yesterday. Here's a bit of what our Attorney General had to say.
They're going to sue over this once again. Is DOJ ready to defend again?
Yes, just like we've been ready. And this is what President Trump, this is what the American people expect President Trump and expect this country to be doing when it comes to election integrity and making sure that we are extraordinarily vigilant about who is voting and that they're eligible to vote. It is surprising and disappointing that instead of working with us, instead of working to make sure that we have free and fair elections, you have governors like the governor in California, you have these advocacy groups that are really just left-wing liberal groups that are immediately saying, oh no, we're gonna sue again, notwithstanding the fact the Supreme Court has already issued its stay. And yes, we will keep on fighting that. We want to make sure that every vote in this country is counted appropriately. And that's what President Trump has told the American people he's going to do. And we're certainly going to back him up with that from the Department of Justice.
There's been a disturbing development in the left's commentary as of late. And I bring that up because it relates to this particular Supreme Court justice move and the Democrats' response to it. We've seen the Arizona Attorney General. She's making comments like, over my dead body will these rules be implemented. The Minnesota professor that we talked about earlier in the week in defending Ilhan Omar, saying that, we should lay down our lives to protect her, where in no way, shape, or form would Ilhan Omar ever do that for any voters, and particularly not a white professor. But my point is that this rhetoric coming from the left as of late of saying, hey, put your bodies on the line. It's not the first time that we've seen this, but I've seen this type of commentary coming from more and more individuals. And it's disturbing to me. It's disturbing in the wake of what we've seen from the leftist activists, from those that are involved with fascist groups like Antifa, to those who just take to the streets to go and block, everyday people that end up buying into the rhetoric and the lies of the left and take to the streets to put themselves in harm's way. And we saw that during Operation Metro Surge. Again, that the Democrats here and the media in Minnesota is desperate to bring back to the forefront. And they're doing a good job. It's lead stories. Wait until I get into my headline roundup from the Star Tribune yesterday and today. It's so blatantly obvious they are pushing propaganda. It's not even funny. But the individuals that took to the streets to go and block ICE and ended up losing their lives for it so senselessly, they were radicalized. They were radicalized into believing that ICE was the Gestapo. They were radicalized into believing that ICE was going and ripping families apart and tearing communities apart, and that this was akin to Nazi Germany, for crying out loud. And especially now, I mean, rational individuals in the, at the height of Operation Metro Surge knew the truth. I knew the truth. You more than likely knew the truth. I'm not talking to the foes. I'm talking to the friends of the show. You were aware of the truth. But now we actually have examples of those of us who were using common sense to know that if you didn't have anybody going and getting in the way of ICE, more than likely the majority of people here in Minnesota wouldn't have even have been aware of their actions. And that's evidenced based off of what I've been sharing over the course of this past week, and that multiple news outlets have been sharing, and that ICE arrests have continued of illegal immigrants, criminals, pedophiles, rapists, murderers, and thieves. The largest number of individuals arrested just took place in July. You didn't even hear about it in the midst of when it was going on, because there wasn't any manufactured outrage encouraging individuals to go and put their lives on the line. But I'm disturbed by this continued rhetoric coming from the left, because I do believe that it's encouraging people to go out there and to commit acts of violence. Case in point, the Spider-Man dude. I have an update on this. Alpha News, the man hailed online as Minnesota's Spider-Man, could face another assault charge after the video captured him striking a Minneapolis police officer in the face during Saturday's chaotic confrontation against the controversial activist Jake Lang and the scheduled rally outside of City Hall. We talked about this yesterday. There's a photograph of Spidey's hand being shoved up against a Minneapolis police officer, and looks like now more charges are coming. The Minneapolis Police Department information officer, Sergeant Garrett Parton, confirmed to Alpha News the police are aware an officer was struck by the 33-year-old William Nicholson Love during the protest. As Alpha News reported on Tuesday, Love became an overnight viral sensation after confronting Lang during the protest while dressed up as Spider-Man. The video of the confrontation shows Love climbing onto a pickup truck occupied by Lang and striking him. Love was subsequently arrested and later released after being charged with a misdemeanor 5th-degree assault. However, the public information officer for the Minneapolis Police Department, Parton, confirmed the charge is not for striking the police officer. When asked whether Love could face an additional charge for assaulting the officer, Parton said the incident will be submitted for consideration. We're going to include the insult for consideration, yes. There's enough video out there for folks to observe very clearly what took place. Well, what encouraged this lunatic to go and do this activity? Certainly the rhetoric coming from elected officials here in Minnesota and across the country regarding how they want those that subscribe to their same ideology cannot be helping, especially when you have the commentary surrounding things like investigations into immigration fraud, and that brought about the Minneapolis professor saying that we would lay down our lives to protect her. But the Arizona Attorney General talking about over my dead body, and I know that these are phrases that are commonly used, and that one's a little bit less egregious, but make no mistake, in the context of what we're seeing happening across the streets of America and the way that these leftists are turning so violent because they bought into the propaganda, it simply can't be ignored or brushed off as just a phrase that is commonly used when you say, over my dead body will voter integrity laws be implemented. It's interesting how the left cares so much about life and death and putting their lives on the line when they really don't care about the lives of the unborn. Just wanted to point that out because I know you were thinking it. Court records show that this Antifa Spider-Man was previously convicted. We reported this yesterday. Felony aggravated battery of a police officer in Cook County, Illinois in 2014. Prior convictions for misdemeanor domestic assault and violating domestic abuse, no contact orders. You have criminal complaints back in 2021. I mean, the list goes on and on when it comes to this buffoon. Now, he's already raised more than $150,000 through 2 online fundraisers. Some coverage described Love as an internet folk hero, while supporters on social media declared him a hero. Minneapolis police aren't quite ready to bestow the superhero status on him, though. Anybody who genuinely assaults another human being is not a hero, said the Minneapolis information officer Parton to Alpha News. And anybody who assaults a cop is also not a hero, not on the eyes of those on the left. Yeah, you assault a cop if you're on the left, and you're going to be applauded. You're going to make a lot of money off of it. The fundraising for Love continues, and he's straight up lying in his fundraising description of what transpired. He claims he tried to block the path of Lang's vehicle with a police barricade, but that officers removed it and then let them through. He says he then jumped onto the moving truck because he felt I had to do whatever I could to protect the people around me. That's not your job, dude. None of this was your job. You chose to do that, protect the people around you. Give me a break already. According to Parton, Love's attempt to move the police barricades occurred later after the confrontation with the truck, as officers were attempting to get the vehicles away from the crowd. Wait, you mean this guy lied? Parton said Love's account reverses the sequence of events. And again, Renee Good, Alex Preddy, all radicalized by the left, right? And by extension, what we're seeing now with the rise of the Democrat Socialists of America plays right into this as well, which brings me to the commentary that I wanted to share with you when I opened up the show this morning. What's happening right now, it's all interconnected. It's all interconnected. The reason why so many individuals were willing to go and take to the streets to push back against ICE is because they were buying into the rhetoric on the left about what was taking place and what ICE was doing. Because this had turned into a left versus right issue, individuals were more than willing to take to the streets because they believe, as they have been taught throughout the entirety of their education, that we are a horribly racist, systemic country, that the Constitution is bad, that people who come here illegally are not breaking the law. I mean, just the list goes on of what these individuals have been told. Democrats have essentially been creating the DSA movement, the individuals now who align themselves with communism. They've created this for a decade or more within the education system. Used to just be the university system. Now it's the grade school public education system. And this generation coming out of our education system, now old enough to vote, believes everything that they've been taught, and they're living in a world where we deal with FOMO and a fear of missing out and instant gratification on almost every aspect of life. So they're not as keen to do what Democrats have been doing, and that is a slow turn to communism here in the country. No, they want it, and they want it right now. The left exacerbated this issue when they went and vilified and demonized ICE during Operation Metro Surge and continue to do so, and I'll have the examples of this later on, because now you have those concerns embedded through the indoctrination of our public education and university system of this new generation of radicals, this new generation of Democrats that are essentially subscribing to Marxism and communism. And then you have ICE show up and they're being told that this is just like Nazi Germany, and they're all in, which only further reinforces the desire that they have on the DSA side to bring about that communism now, to tear down the Constitution now. The Democrats have done it to themselves. Maybe it's a good thing. I know it's scary, and we've talked about this before, between which candidates do you want to have running in these elections against Republicans? Do you want more moderate Democrats, or do you want the radical communist socialists? There's arguments to be made both ways about which is better. Do we dare run the risk of having these Democrat socialists win office because we think that they are more beatable than your typical Democrat who's slow-walking communism? Remains to be seen, and we'll find out in November. But that's what's happening within the Democrat Party right now. I want to expand upon this coming up in just a moment. Also, we will turn our attention back over to the Minnesota State Fair story I didn't get a chance to dive into in detail yesterday, but I will this morning. You had the Ramsey County Sheriff sending out 233 letters about Somali gang association ahead of the Minnesota State Fair, which caused a lot of consternation among the Somali community. So we'll give you details on that if you want to leave us a comment if you're heading to the fair this morning, or based on the commentary that you've heard so far on the show, you can do so on the Blaster line. That's 612-584-4565. And you can also email john.justice@americanexperiment.org. And remember, if you need to get your sleep back on track, that was certainly the case for me. My circadian rhythm, it went away a long time ago. I've been doing mornings now for 30 years, and I've always struggled getting a good night's sleep. That all changed a little more than a year ago when I started taking the Mini Leaf Night Gummies. They are fantastic. They taste great. You just take one before you go to bed. You get a great night's sleep, even if you wake up in the middle of the night. When you hit the sheets, you're out like a light, and you wake up feeling refreshed. I did this morning. I woke up with the alarm and popped up. I was ready to go. Ready to come in here and talk to you to provide this amazing, excellent commentary. Also, at minileaf.com, you can find the fun gummies, the spooky mini leaf tonics. The gummies are all packaged in Brooklyn Park locally. The tonics are brewed right here in Eden Prairie. And a quick shout out to their effective pain cream. Melinda yesterday was dealing with just some horrible neck pain, and she put on some of the Triple Diamond pain cream, and she came to me and she says, man, I need to come on your show and just talk about how effective the pain cream is, because I put that on my neck and it just completely took care of the problem. It's fantastic stuff. It's all available at MINNELEAF.com. That's minileaf.com.
And now here's commentary on the latest issues facing Minnesotans from the hosts, policy fellows, and guests of American Experiment. For more content, head on over to the center of the American Experiment's YouTube page or at americanexperiment.org.
And I think that's kind of the theme of today's episode is you're going to hear politicians very soon tell you that there's nothing from this budget that they can cut because it is all essential. It is all needed. Well, just keep these in mind as examples. The sex change surgery on the taxpayer dollars, the beyond welfare spending, the third most of any state in the country. Keep those in mind when a politician looks you in the eye and says that, no, actually, we need your tax dollars because all these things are super important. When instead, they could be looking at this budget and saying, yeah, actually, we're going to cut those sex change surgeries. We're going to cut some welfare spending for the people that don't actually need it and keep it only for the people that do need it. Because there is a place for it. It's great. We can help out some people that absolutely need it until they get back on their feet.
That's not what our system is at right now.
That is absolutely not where our system is, and that is where it should be.
Think about it. Now that school's back in session, how are Minnesota students doing? Not very well. Minnesota ACT scores fell again last year and are the lowest they've been in 10 years. In fact, fewer than half of Minnesota students can either read or do math at grade level. Think about it. We used to brag about our schools. Now we're losing to states like Mississippi. Visit americanexperiment.org for more information. Think About It is brought to you by Center of the American Experiment, Minnesota's think tank.
The Republican Party had really kind of pushed away, repelled a lot of the working class. And Trump's great insight was that the Democratic Party had pushed those people away too. They were, heavy in the sort of graduate school world. And he realized there are millions of these voters across Pennsylvania, Ohio, Michigan, Wisconsin. There's millions of them who are just waiting to vote for me, Donald J. Trump. And it worked.
If you would like to support the John Justice Show, become an advertiser. Competitive rates for both personal endorsements and standard ads are available. For more details, email john.justice@americanexperiment.org.
And by the way, what you heard there just a moment ago was just a portion of the interview that John Hinderrocker here at Center of the American Experiment did with Byron York. And Byron York is, of course, our keynote speaker for the 2026 fall briefing, the Battle for Congress, an insider's look at the midterm elections. It's happening on the 19th of September at the Winery at Sovereign Estate. And you can get more details right now at americanexperiment.org.
Let me back up. What they found is that there is a man, his name is Seiko Dukali, who has been the owner of at least 24 group homes, mostly in the northwestern Twin Cities, and has collected at least $36 million in taxpayer funds over the past 10 years. They seem to mostly be in the Brooklyn Park, Brooklyn Center area, which is where there's a ton of group homes for whatever reason. But what's insane about this is Dukali is a government official in Liberia and doesn't even live in Minnesota. So he's claiming to run these group homes that he's not even in the same country as.
Think about it. Minnesota has always been a low crime state. But according to the most recent Bureau of Criminal Apprehension data, we are now above the national average when it comes to Part 1 crimes, a category that includes crimes like murder, assault, rape, and carjackings. Think about it. Minnesota is now a high crime state. Visit highcrimemn.com to learn more. Think About It is brought to you by Center of the American Experiment, Minnesota's think tank.
It's a John Justice Show presented by American Experiment. You can listen at americanexperiment.org. You can also download the free MixLR app if you're not already listening on the app, and just search for American Experiment and John Justice. The podcasts are loaded into the app after the show is over, also available across all the major podcast platforms. And watch the show live on Facebook and YouTube, on the Facebook and YouTube pages for Center of the American Experiment, and my personal ones as well. Before we turn our attention over to affairs regarding the Minnesota State Fair, which gates actually open at 7 o'clock this morning. Friend of the show, Dennis, had informed me. And I think this is the morning when all the politicians show up there and shoot their little campaign videos before the fair opens. And they talk about how amazing the fair is and how they're going to go have beer and all this stuff. So to all the fair goers out there, I hope you have a fantastic day. And to everybody else, I hope that you'll come on by the booth during the Minnesota State Fair on Saturday. And again, I'll be at the booth between 11 and 1, but stop on by and get yourself a free Center of the American Experiment items. We've got a lot of stuff to be giving away at the event on Saturday. So let me wrap up the commentary that I was sharing earlier, dovetailing off of what I heard Mike Slater talk about in a recent podcast of his. This was about a week ago, I think, a little bit older. I was getting caught up on the drive in. It's called the Faith in Politics podcast. My father turned me on to this, and it's a fantastic listen. And the point that he made in the podcast, and something that I hadn't heard before, is that, Democrats in the DSA, the Democrat Socialists of America, they want exactly the same thing. They want communism in America. But your typical Democrats have been slow walking it. Whereas the DSA, they want it right now. But the Democrats manufactured their own communist takeover. As I mentioned, decades of Marxist indoctrination, the critical race theory that has infected our schools nationwide, has a new generation believing that communism is the answer to all their woes, that their feelings trump anything else. Feelings over facts, all of it. And they want that communism right now. They're not willing to wait. And they're being open and blatant about how much they want it to happen right now. I mean, audio I haven't even shared on the show from various DSA meetings that are being put out on podcasts. They're not even trying to hide it, saying that the biggest stumbling block that they have to implement their agenda nationwide is the United States Constitution. And then they go on to discuss how they want to go and uproot the Constitution, how to get over that stumbling block so they can implement what the Democrats have been using to indoctrinate them now throughout the entirety of their education system. And they're also in an age of instant gratification, right? It's like their new the new DSA are simply Democrats that are faster and more intense. The Democrat Party created the DSA, which is why, partly why, you have seen this mentality of we're a big tent. We're welcoming these groups into the fold because they are partly responsible for creating them. Now, what these establishment Democrats that have been slow walking communism aren't taking into account or simply don't care about is that this new, faster, more intense version of Democrats that is embracing communism and wants to implement it as soon as possible, they will go and undermine those established Democrats. But many of those individuals, they're timing out and aging out of politics anyways. And this is what's opened the door to the rise of the Islamist as well, because there is plenty in terms of policy and ideology that those of the Islamic faith and Democrats disagree with, but the enemy of my enemy is my friend. And so the faster, more intense DSA, communist loving, want to get it implemented right now generation of those rising up the ranks in politics through the Democrat Party, you have the Islamists that are seeking to exploit that. Hey, we'll partner with you because we want the same thing. We also want to tear down what has made this country great. We also want to tear down the Constitution. But much like the faster, more intense Democrats taking over and running out the former slow walking communism Democrats, you're going to have the bigger fish of the Islamists coming in if they were to grab control, if they were actually able to go and uproot the United States Constitution. They'll eat those communists for lunch and they'll just take over completely. And there's one more angle to this that I want to mention, and then we'll turn our attention over to the state fair. And it's how the Democrat Party has been so successful in doing this, in the indoctrination, and why so many Democrats appear the way that they do, like a bunch of weirdo clowns. It's because they have convinced this generation that they will be accepted if they just adopt their new normal. So let me boil it down like this. If you're overweight, not getting positive attention, don't want to go through and lose the weight and take care of yourself, the Democrat leftist will tell them, you're fine just the way you are. Your health's not in danger. Fat is healthy. You can be healthy fat. It's totally fine. If you're unattractive, if you're angry, you're not accepted by society, you're not getting the love that you want, which happens a lot right now for a lot of individuals. It has nothing to do with politics. It has everything to do with the rise of social media, the disconnect that same generation that's coming up embracing communism and wanting to establish it right away. This is the same group that's come up post-COVID, disconnected from, a positive social sphere, living life through the black mirrors in their hands. And they're being told by the left, well, if you're unattractive or overweight, just make yourself look like a clown. Make your outer self a reflection of what your inner self is. The more outlandish you are, the more we'll accept you into the fold. You just be you. Societal standards and norms, be damned. You will be loved. You will be applauded. You will be welcomed as pawns to be used by this new generation of leftists that want to undo everything that makes the United States of America the greatest country on the face of the planet, all for the sake of power. It's all by design. And it's the Democrats that have done this. So I was asking the question, it was a while ago, it was like a week ago or whatever, talking about, Democrats and DSA taking over and what it must be like to be a sort of established Democrat and seeing this happen. No, the reality is they did it to themselves. They created this generation coming up that is now going to go and take over the party. And the takeover is almost complete. The only question that remains is, and we'll get answers in November, is the average voter going to go and reject this? Are Democrats that do not align with communism, because there are Democrats that don't align with communism. I think you would see more and more Democrats leaving the Democrat Party. I do think ultimately if the Democrat Party is completely taken over by the DSA, and heaven forbid they do end up getting into office and positions of significant power here in the country, It's completely and totally unsustainable, but they'll do a lot of damage as they go and they implement their radical anti-American ideologies. Let's get to some of your thoughts from the Blaster line this morning, 612-584-4565.
Yeah, morning, John. Just listening to you talk, and you're talking about the youth created by the Democrats, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah, it's like I've been saying for years, man. They are the Red Guard. They are the brown shirts, and both of them are appropriate. They're raised by the system. That's why you got so many leaning more communists, so many leaning more fascists, because they're the Red Guard, they're the brown shirts, and they're raised to have the revolution.
There's a video going around. I reposted it with some commentary on X. I didn't grab the audio because it was a little hard to hear, but Keith Ellison, and I don't know how long ago this was, the little man was all dressed up in winter clothing. He looked like, if you've ever seen A Christmas Story, he looked like when the brother was all dressed up to go outside and he couldn't move because the mom had put so many layers on, and if he fell over, he was like a turtle. A turtle stuck on its back. That's what Keith Ellison looks like. And at one point, he's with Hassan Piker. I shouldn't bury the lead here. He did a podcast or an event with Hassan Piker, and at one point, both of the men stand up, and like Ellison's like half his size, and Piker's only like 6'3". He's only got like an inch and a half on me, for crying out loud. Ellison's a little dude. Anyway, not the point of the video. The point of the video was the interview portion of the conversation between Ellison and Piker had wrapped up. And Ellison is sitting there just chatting away with Hassan Piker. It is such a pathetic display because I know exactly what is going on because I've been there on both sides. So they wrap up this interview. Ellison is supposed to get up and walk away. I think Hassan was probably going to do more commentary, but Ellison's there on his phone and he's having this conversation with Hassan. And if I have no sympathy for the radical leftist anti-American dirtbag Hassan Piker, so do not take any of my commentary as I go and rip on Keith Ellison to mean anything positive to Hassan Piker at all. The guy is a blight upon America. I cannot state that more ardently. However, you could tell on Hassan Piker's face that he was done with the interview. Like he was ready to move on to the next thing. And what you watch in the video is Ellison getting all chummy with Hassan. Hey, it'd be great if we could talk again. We should go and exchange numbers. And of course Ellison would. Of course Ellison would be talking to this radical anti-American. Of course he would want to be buddy-buddy and chummy with an individual like Hassan Piker. That doesn't surprise me at all. What I thought was so humorous and ultimately pathetic was what a weasel Ellison was in that moment, thinking he's got himself a new friend. And you could just see on Hassan Piker's face that he was done with the conversation. At one point, he kind of stands up to urge Ellison. It's the body language you got to watch as Ellison kind of lingers because he thinks he has a new commie buddy. It was one of the funniest pieces of audio that I had in video that I had seen in a long time. So if you follow me on X, check out the video for yourself and just watch the body language of that anti-American Piker, and you'll see exactly what it is that I'm referring to.
Hey, John, all these useful idiots, the joke is on them, because if they get their way, they're not going to be in charge. And when the real gangsters of the 20...
Sorry about that. Your blast cut out there, my friend. But thank you, Lou. It's always great to hear from you. Again, 612-584-4565, 612-584-4565. All right, Minnesota State Fair. Gates open in less than 10 minutes from now. So is there a mad dash for any... I have all these Minnesota State Fair questions. I should save these for tomorrow. Like Katherine Johnson's our resident Minnesota State Fair fan. I think she's into the State Fair like I'm into Disneyland. Both are kind of a little disturbing, for being honest. There, producer Devin. But I do wonder, are there things that people rush to go do? Like, is there a certain ride that you rush to go do, or do you run to get your Sweet Martha's cookies, or do you? I want to know. I want to learn more about the fair this year. I'm going to open my mind a little bit. Make plans to join us Saturday, 11 until 1, Center of the American Experiment booth. Dan Patch area was what I was told yesterday. I was told to mention it's the Dan Patch area. That is where we will be located on Saturday. Ahead of the state fair, the Ramsey County Sheriff ended up sending letters to 233 people warning them that their association with known gang members of the Minnesota State Fair will be documented for potential prosecution. The action followed agreements from 7 of the 10 alleged gang members to stay away from the fair. Of course, we've been talking about this all week here on the show. The move came after the 7 of the 10 alleged gang members agreed last week to stay away from the fair, and a judge ended up enforcing that order. So in talking with local media, Ramsey County Sheriff Bob Fletcher was talking and speaking specifically about his concern about the Somali gangs in Minnesota that are especially violent and threatening the state fair. And this is where the honest conversations need to come into place. Because I have a story, and I'll give you the details. The Somali community is now condemning not the gang activity, not the violence among their youth and how prone they are to violence, but the outreach program warning the individuals that there are repercussions for your actions if you act inappropriately at the Minnesota State Fair. But the Somali community is pushing back on the fact that those individuals were warned of their abhorrent behavior. You know, it's a tragedy, but what's happened is so many of these individuals have immigrated here from these ravished regions where they don't have the rule of law, where they're living in squalor, desperation, fraud is rampant, and they haven't assimilated. They haven't adopted our values. They brought the violence, they brought the fraudulent mentality here to the United States, and specifically here to Minnesota, because the DFL has welcomed it with open arms because they want the votes. It's that simple. Talking with local media, this is what the Ramsey County Sheriff Bob Fletcher had to say regarding this particular issue, and sending out and warning those hundreds of Somali gang members, don't do the violence that you are saying you are going to do.
We've had gangs coming to the Minnesota State Fair for 30, 40 years. But they've always agreed the fair is neutral ground, and let's all go have fun and respect the fairgrounds. We've had Hell's Outcast, Hell's Angels here. The Hell's Outcast used to hang by the pickle stand. I've been here for many, many years, but we've never had threats of violence like we're having from the Somali gangs. We will have Karen gangs, we'll have some Hmong gangs here, we'll have some extremists on the right here. But none of them are promising chaos except for the Somali gangs. We sent 233 letters to kids that we know have had association with some of the other gang members. And really, it's a warning letter. We're going to document your activity, and that can be used against you later in some court process. The problems have always stemmed from the Midway. And so our staffing is increased dramatically after 7 o'clock in the Midway area. This fair behind us, I've been coming here for over 50 years. This is a place for fun. All right, I can't overstate how important it is for everyone to have fun. This is a place where families bring their children. Don't endanger families. Come here and have some fun, and settle your grievances elsewhere. Settle your grievances where it's not going to impact 2 million other people that are here.
We have a county sheriff here in Minnesota.
And again, those were comments by the Ramsey County Sheriff, Bob Fletcher. And he's spot on in those comments. And he's an individual who's not afraid to speak the truth. These are the conversations that we need to have as grown-ups. They're fact-based. They're not based on race. We all come from somewhere. They're not based on prejudice. They're based off of individuals' behavior, their criminal proclivity, what they were, the society and the values that they were raised in, and an inability to seem to adapt to what the United States has to offer, what the state of Minnesota has to offer. But in that case, they're taking advantage of what the DFL has done, and that is turned a blind eye for too long to the crime, to the fraud. Only when it got so big that it couldn't be ignored anymore did they go and address it. Let's get to a few of your thoughts from the Blaster line this morning here on the John Justice Show, presented by American Experiment.
Hey, John, Jerry Rosemount. Good listening to you on this channel. You know, we asked Somali gangs to not go to the state fair and kill anybody. What are we doing here? What are we doing? Why don't we just ask them to stop doing violence everywhere? If it's that simple.
Yeah. It's appeasement. You know, Bill Glahn hit the nail on the head earlier this week talking about they're trying to have it both ways. They're trying to do this, we're going to be heavy-handed and bring about a court order to stop you doing what you're doing. But at the same time, we're actually going to go and give them legitimacy by even negotiating with these clowns. They're dangerous clowns, make no mistake, but they are clowns nonetheless.
Well, they come in, they try and take our cultures and norms, and here's the next thing, state fair. They're going to try and take it over, do their thing, make it their own deal. Have a good day.
Well, and make no mistake, too, the only reason why this is getting a lot of attention and the state fair is a focus, and why Ellison and others and Ramsey County Attorney Choi moved so swiftly to go and tap down on this, it's not because they have any concern for the public. It's not because they have any concerns of these gangs rioting. They don't really give a rip. No, they did it because if it happens at the Minnesota State Fair, they cannot escape the scrutiny. The Minnesota State Fair is Bob Fletcher laid it out in his commentary. That's supposed to be a fun place. It's something that the Minnesotans look forward to every single year as one of the greatest state fairs in the country. And you got gang members that are talking about doing violence there. The only reason why Thief Ellison cares at all is, as I mentioned, because it would be a horrible look for Democrats heading into November's election if they were to go and allow violence to take place, especially if they knew about it ahead of time.
People are always surprised that I don't eat my way to the state fair. What I like to do at the state fair is go to the various free stages and listen to the live music. I love listening to live music, and that is just my absolute favorite thing to do. Thank you.
Well, maybe that's what we'll do on tomorrow's show. Maybe we can do maybe for Freedom Friday, we can talk about your favorite activities at the fair. I want to get into some fair talk. I'm kind of embracing it this year. I haven't in years past, but I don't know. Kind of into it. Still not sure how I'm getting there yet. Well, I had several people give me advice on where Melinda and I could park and take a bus in, so I may take advantage of that for the fair on Saturday. It is the John Justice Show, presented by American Experiment. If you want to leave us a comment, you can do so at 612-584-4565, and also john.justice@americanexperiment.org. We just played audio a moment ago, but Ramsey County Sheriff Bob Fletcher had sent out over 200 letters that were targeted to Somali youth involved in gangs that the sheriff's office was aware of, warning them of partaking in any sort of criminal activity on fair grounds. I had a question that rolled in. Let's go here to a friend of the show.
I really wonder how many of those 200 plus letters were returned to sender, address or addressee unknown. Just a thought.
Probably not as many as you think. I mean, the reason why they have the information in the first place is because a lot of these individuals have already been arrested, but then they've been released through the revolving door of criminality that takes place in Ramsey and Hennepin County. Let's go back to some of your thoughts this morning. And the end of Fletcher's comments was not lost on some friends of the show.
You know, John, I love the way that Bob Fletcher panders to the left at the end of the statement there, where he throws in the extreme right-wingers that are going to be there, too. What a dork.
You know, it's true. I do wonder if he did that because it was just a pander and he knew that he could take a little bit of heat off and probably gain a little bit more credibility in his commentary if he tosses in the stereotype that there should be any concern of right-wingers at the Minnesota State Fair. Ugh. But if you're on the left and they see, you know, the booths, like Action for Liberty's booth, for example, they always have a lot of caricatures of dim walls and whatnot. To individuals on the left, that's violence. to that generation of young voters, those young Democrats that want the communism now crowd. They've been taught that their feelings, if they are hurt, that is akin to violence taking place. Probably in their minds just as bad as what the gangs would end up doing. So just keep that in mind. And again, I'm with you. It was a bit of a pander there at Fletcher's comments, but there's a part of me that thinks that he did it just because he thought his commentary would be taken more seriously if he tossed that in just to appease those on the left.
Just listening to the sheriff talk about the gangs, all the gangs that have been at the state fair, and I heard him say right wing. I just love that. There's we can't just say that the Somali gangs are a problem. We have to blame or have to say that all these other white gangs are causing such problems, and we're so problematic. You can't just say these guys are bad. This needs to be taken care of.
Yeah, again, a point that was not lost on you guys this morning. Let's go back to the blaster line here on the John Justice Show.
230 some known Somali gang members. I refuse to believe that they were all born here in the United States.
No.
If you know they're known affiliated gang members, get them out of here. Pretty simple answer. And you say, handle your grievances somewhere else. Handle it back in Somalia.
The Somali community is criticizing the letter campaign by Fletcher. They say it unfairly targeted Somali youth and families. An individual of the Islamic Association of North America argues the campaign creates a division, stigmatizes the community, while local leaders are already working with law enforcement to address the gang-related issues in a collaborative fashion. The local advocates are stepping forward to criticize the letter campaign, targeting specific Somali youth and families ahead of the fair. The executive director says the centers and faith leaders are already organizing meetings with law enforcement to find the collaborative solutions that he says avoid stigmatizing rhetoric. If there is any stigmatizing rhetoric, it's only because you are choosing to be stigmatized by the language being used, and you have chosen to call it rhetoric when it's just facts. That's on you. That's on the observer. That's not on the individual that's delivering the information. These are just facts. We have a problem with violent Somali gangs. And typically, the individuals that are involved in those violent Somali gangs are the youth within the Somali community. If it's not youth that's involved in these gangs that's a part of your family, then they're not talking about you. If you're a young Somali here in Minnesota and you're following the law, then they're not talking about you. This is not a blanket condemnation. This is on the individuals that are actually out there committing crime. It doesn't matter what their background is. It just happens to be that in this case, this is a concentrated group of individuals from one particular community, much in the same way that we've seen the fraud as well. If you are a Somali individual or from any immigrant background here in Minnesota, and you're not going and committing acts of fraud, then when we talk about fraud, and the majority of it, some 90% being perpetuated by the Somali community, if you're not a part of that, then we're not talking about you and you have no reason to be offended. If you are, then that's a choice that you are making. That's not the facts problem. That's your problem.
Good morning, John. Happy State Fair Day. Telling them that they can't come to the State Fair, that's just preparing a lawsuit. First Amendment has freedom of assembly.
Now, let me stop here. We already took care of that because they've already moved through the courts. I know you were trying to be sarcastic in your commentary there. But the reality is this is why they moved forward and got a court order to make that happen, because it ends up taking away those issues, those legal issues that you were about to mention there. But I do appreciate you leaving a blast.
Bob Fletcher, you go as far as to say, we may even have far right-wing activists come here. You don't mention anything from the left, because the left is going to stay away from there, right? They're not going to show up, so you don't even have to mention that.
Nope.
Why did you have to pinpoint that out? What a joke he is.
Thank you to everybody. 612-584-4565. Keep your comments rolling into the blaster line this morning. The executive director of the Islamic Association says the letter and the ask of the sheriff only divides the community even more. That's because you're letting that happen. You see, all of that, all their concerns that they're laying out here are avoidable if they just look at it from a fact-based standpoint and just admit the reality. He says he is, as he says, trying to solve a problem, an issue, but he's creating much more problems that he cannot solve at all. They went on to say that it's dangerous for Fletcher to label the whole Somali community as being involved in gang activity and scapegoating Somali parents as the problem. He's not doing that. He didn't do that. Look, he generalized, but he was specific as who he was referring to. Lawbreakers. It's the leader of the Islamic Association of North America that's doing that. And make no mistake, the reason they're doing that is because they're not dumb. They know they gain more support from the community. They gain more support from the left. They gain more support from the politicians in the DFL that they vote for time and again. So they know that, hey, we can exploit this to our benefit. We can get more influence. We can get more power if we take the most egregious offense to the reality that an individual like Bob Fletcher laid out. And the whole commentary that he gave, it's the broken clock was right twice a day. Again, I'm not totally convinced that Fletcher didn't throw that in there just because, but he may have been tossing out ridiculous rhetoric because that's what he truly believes. And if Fletcher believes that, then he's an idiot too, even if he is trying to do the same thing regarding dealing with the problem of gangs. All right, let's get back to some more of your thoughts from the Blaster line this morning, 612-584-4565, 612-584-4565. And let's go. Sorry, I'm just looking through the blast as I talk here. We'll go and hear from Ron.
All these people talking about sending these Somalians back to Somalia. I don't understand why we would spend that much money to do that. Just get them out of the United States. I don't care where you bring them. If you actually want to just drop them on land somewhere, send them to Cuba. Send them to Mexico. I don't care. So,
now, I'm not going down. For me personally, I'm not going down this road. I'm not. If you're not breaking the law, I don't have an issue. Follow the laws of the United States of America. Respect the United States Constitution. Respect our country. Learn the language. Be a positive influence. Be a positive contributor to what makes this country great. If you're doing that, I don't care where you came from. I don't care what religion you are. I don't care what color your skin is. I don't care how many pieces of metal you shoved in your face. It doesn't matter to me. None of it does. If you follow the law, letter of the law, even if we disagree on politics, I'm fine. But if you break the law, if you're involved in criminal activity, if you're involved in fraud, yeah, then we have a problem. But I'm not taking this blanket condemnation because that feeds into what I just mentioned regarding the commentary coming from the Islamic community in relation to Bob Fletcher's letter campaign. Because now you've just gone and legitimized the argument that they're attempting to make. No, if you are following the law, there's no problem. Unfortunately, too many individuals of particular communities are not following the law. And therein lies the problem. You hold people accountable. You stop the fraud before it ends up spiraling out of control. You don't ignore the warning signs as they pop up year after year with the requests of funding from organizations. And then most of the commentary of what we're talking about ends up taking care of itself. What's the overlap of fraud relating to the individuals going and doing crime and what families they're coming from? There's a lot of corkboard, yarn, and push pin connections that could easily go and be made. All right, let's go here. Yesterday, Liz Collin had posted some breaking news on X. Savage police report a raid that took place at the 6900 block of 156th Street. Alpha News had reported back in April that neighbors reported that the home was tied to a Somali transportation and food service company. At least 6 people were taken into custody on the scene, according to neighbors. Edina police were also present. So I'll give you the update of what happened, but here's a bit of the story in the run-up to this from Alpha News prior to this event and these arrests and the warrant being executed yesterday in Savage. A concerned Minnesota homeowner. They are referred to as Rick in the story for safety reasons. had some suspicions about the things that he noticed in the Savage neighborhood. Speaking with Liz Collin on her podcast, he said, it's probably been 2 or 3 years, and there's one home that stands out specifically. They've always had a unique collection of high-end cars, so that's kind of what brought my attention to that home. But after watching the videos about fraud in Minnesota, he said the Nick Shirley stuff was kind of correlating with some of the things that he observed in his own neighborhood. That's when Rick started looking up some of the addresses in his neighborhood and discovered that they were associated with transportation services, a food prep company, and an adult home care center. But Rick said that something else really stood out. It was the lack of any activity at these addresses, especially anything that seemed like business activity. There's 8 homes, all within a 2-block radius. So all of them were either non-emergency transportation service or in-home adult care or the food preparation, and a couple of them immediately showed links to, feeding our future. Cue the dun, dun, dun. One of the homes was occupied by Abdiaziz Farah, who was sentenced to 28 years in prison last August for their role in the $250 million Feeding Our Future scandal. Also admitted to attempting to bribe the juror, something that we talked about in previous iterations of the John Justice Show. When discussing the non-emergency medical transportation companies in the area, Rick said none of the vehicles were leaving. Even like in the wintertime, it would snow, and it would snow on the vehicle, and then all around the vehicle, and the snow never got cleared off. It would just sit there until it melted. There were 2, 3, 4 weeks at a time when the snow would just sit on the car, and it just showed that the vehicles were not moving or going anywhere. Rick went on to explain how he called one of the medical transportation vans for a ride after seeing that the company had allegedly logged millions of miles. The phone number was on a decal on the side of the van, so I called it. Somebody answered, and I asked if I could schedule a ride to a doctor's appointment. And immediately they're like, nope, we're all booked up. And I'm like, well, I didn't even give the date and the time yet. That's a bit of a red flag. She says, oh, we're booked up, and then hung up on me. The van is still sitting right here. Other telling signs became obvious during Operation Metro Surge when thousands of ICE agents, of course, conducted a federal law enforcement in Minnesota. I don't know if you're aware that this took place. Certainly, if you've been paying attention to any of the local news media outlets over the course of the past week, you've heard about this, even though it took place at the end of last year and into the beginning of this year. It's like months ago, and we haven't had any issues since then. All those exotic cars, though, during Operation Metro Surge, he says, the high-end vehicles, right when the surge started, they all vanished. Oh, what a shock. They disappeared. About a month and a half later, when they started announcing that they were going to withdraw out of Minnesota, they all magically reappeared again. When they disappeared for that month and a half, they were kind of replaced with a Nissan Altima or a Honda or something. It wasn't high-end cars anymore, Rick remembered. Now, Alpha News reached out to the Minnesota Department of Human Services at the time of the writing of this article months ago. Regarding Rick's information and the addresses in the neighborhood, a spokesperson provided a rather telling reply saying, to protect the integrity of investigations, the Data Practices Act makes investigative data confidential while the investigation is ongoing. Which brings us to what took place yesterday that Liz Collin at Alpha News had reported on. The Savage police report the raid that took place on the very block and the very home that Rick was talking to Alpha News about. Multiple search warrants were executed across the metro, not just this location, but multiple locations, which included the subject of this previous story. I've made this comment before, and I've raised this question before. And maybe I've already given myself a part of the answer in my commentary earlier about those that immigrate to the country, where they're coming from, and the values or the lack thereof that they're bringing here to the United States of America. But I just don't know how do you live this way? Unless, I mean, and what I mean by that is how do you live under this criminal activity on a daily basis? I mean, how are you going about your daily life not stressed to the max? Not, worried about every car that drives by your home? And I think the answer is, well, if you were raised in a society where this type of fraudulent behavior was accepted, then maybe it's no sweat to you. Now, on top of that, what have you had here for far too long? You've had a party in the DFL, in the Democrats in Minnesota, that have enabled all of this to happen. When you have Keith Ellison talking to a group of individuals that would eventually be caught up in feeding our future fraud, actual fraudsters being caught on tape talking about how he was in support of them, that he would fight for them over the individuals that were investigating their alleged acts of fraud. I mean, you begin to see that the individuals are enabled in doing this fraudulent behavior. When you have the media, like with what I'm about to share with you, that challenges the dollar amount assertions of just how much money has been stolen, it undermines the issue of fraud and the severity of it, all for the sake of carrying the water for Democrats. Bill Walsh here at American Experiment has a piece up that I'll share with you. KSTP challenges the $9 billion fraud total. Spoiler alert, it's accurate, the $9 billion fraud. But it's only being challenged because for as much as the left wants to pretend that they care about the fraud, it's still viewed as a mostly conservative concern. And things and those concerns must be diminished if Dems want to win in November. And so while you do have, reporting that's decent and investigative work, because fraud is an issue for both parties right now, there's no escaping it anymore. It's the whole reason why Governor Tim Walz had to go and drop out of the race in the first place. But now that we are counting down the weeks to the election, you see the local media falling right in line with helping the Democrats in any way, shape, or form that they can, whether it's this story here, Tom Hauser at KSTP trying to downplay the $9 billion accurate figure. And the only way they're getting around this is they're framing the issue of fraud and the dollar amount in such a way where they can go and make this argument without taking into account the broader commentary and the data that's available that leads accurately to an estimated $9 billion figure. I've used the example before of radio ratings, wherein there's, some people know this, some people don't, but there's various different demographic breakdowns of radio ratings. They're broken up by age groups. You have 12 plus, you have, 18 to 34, you have 34 to 65 or 25 to 64 is typically the talk show range. And then you can boil it down even further to get into regions and areas. The point is that if you are working for a radio station, you can probably find a data point somewhere in there where you can go and say, hey, we're number one. If you look deep enough. Same thing here. You frame the argument. You set forward your own baseline standards of which you are tabulating how much fraud has actually occurred here in Minnesota. And it gives you the ability to say, oh, you know what? That $9 billion figure that those Republicans keep putting out there isn't really accurate. We've only really seen truly $230 million, nowhere near the $9 billion. And it's bogus. They're gaming the numbers. And then on top of the media also carrying the water, keeping Metro Surge alive, which is something that we'll also talk about coming up in just a few minutes here on the John Justice Show. Let's go back to the blaster line, though. Sneak in a couple of comments from friends of the show this morning.
Hey, John, you may agree with this one. I think it's time to move the location of the state fair out of the metro to somewhere in the rural where you can have parking and everything else and proper security.
No, I don't think that's necessary at all. The fair is fine where it is. They're dealing with the parking. You can get bussed in. Security is just fine. So I appreciate the out-of-the-box thinking, but no, there's no reason to go and move the Minnesota State Fair. That's completely unnecessary. I like ideas, just not a very good one. Tom Hauser at KSTP writes Bill Walsh, ran a story last night. questioning the origins of and the accuracy of the claim that fraud in Minnesota accounts to $9 billion. Among many others, American Experiment has been using the $9 billion fraud figure to help explain why 58% of Minnesotans believe the state is on the wrong track. Head on over to AmericanExperiment.org. See the Wrong Track Minnesota list for yourself, all based in facts. The data points are all available for there to you and go and peruse if you question the validity of those Wrong Track Minnesota items. But Bill goes on to say, Tom Hauser correctly traces the origin to John Thompson, the U.S. Attorney's Office in Minneapolis. Thompson said, doing the thing with my fingers, half or more of the $18 billion in spending on 14 high-risk Medicaid programs in Minnesota was fraudulent. Asked and answered. KSTP could have concluded their piece right there. That's the data point. Half or more of the $18 billion in spending on the 14 high-risk Medicaid programs in Minnesota was fraudulent, to the point where they had to shut down an entire Medicaid program because it was 100% fraudulent. There are dollar amounts attached to that are real, that are tangible, even if nobody has gone through the courts and been convicted and it hasn't been put on record in a court. It doesn't make that number fictitious. But Hauser goes on to compare the $9 billion assessment against a ledger of money connected to fraud convictions, including the Feeding Our Future case at $300 million. His conclusion is that the money uncovered through the investigations, arrests, and convictions will likely never reach $9 billion. So here you have the argument going the other way, saying, well, I don't believe. Right? It's editorial. It's commentary. It's not fact-based. I don't believe it'll ever reach that much. But Walsh goes on to say, I would argue that those are two completely different numbers and shouldn't even be compared. I think that Joe Thompson would agree with me. I was at a press conference when Thompson delivered his dire assessment of fraud. The question he was answering went something like this. Joe, if your investigators can see all this fraudulent activity when they examine the data, don't the employees in the Walz administration see the exact same thing? Thompson agreed with that sentiment, and his half or more prediction of $9 billion came through that exchange. This is where the disconnect appears between the $9 billion assessment and Hauser's attempts to account for every dollar connected to a conviction or investigation. Having received access to the Department of Human Services computer systems, Thompson could see that more than half of the activity was fraudulent. It doesn't mean the federal or state government will ever prosecute those cases that add up to that amount. I've also heard Thompson say more than once that we prosecute people, not dollars. A lot of the fraud will never be prosecuted. That's one of the sad features of Minnesota's fraud story. The sheer volume of fraud overwhelmed the system. As Thompson said in that same press conference, in Minnesota, fraud was a business plan. As Minnesotans believe more than $9 billion was stolen from the Minnesota taxpayers through Medicaid fraud, instead of following the court docket, news outlets should watch future state budgets, especially the Human Services budget, but only if state agencies can actually stop the fraud. And I don't know where the motivation comes to go and skew the numbers and to push back on this. But again, my only conclusion is that this is a means to help out the Democrats when it comes to tackling fraud, to diminish the impact of it. There's an editorial in the Star Tribune. I didn't pull it. I think Rochelle Olson had penned it. But it was like, it was essentially with two female governors at the top of the ticket, running, with two females running for governor. Why is the conversation still about men? Well, blame the Democrats. They're the ones that can't let Trump go. Your Flanagan, your Klobuchar, et al., they're the ones that keep just trying to tie the GOP to Trump over and over again. So get mad at them if they're talking about a man in the White House, which is what they're really upset about. But you're seeing a full throttle attempt to try to help Democrats right now here in Minnesota, because this is going to be a close race. The GOP has put forward a slate of statewide candidates that are in a great position, especially based off of everything that we've been talking about on the show, to actually go and win some elections statewide where they haven't been able to in the past. So it's all hands on deck for the left. And that includes wasting time arguing a $9 billion fraud figure. That's why I think this whole thing exists. It's why the headlines in the Star Tribune for the past 2 days have been dominated with ICE news. I'll share this with you in just a moment. But yesterday's lead story was an ICE-related story with a picture, scary picture of ICE agents on it. And this morning when I got up, a different ICE story with an even scarier picture of ICE agents on it. Now, I know there is diminishing readers to the Star Tribune, but these newspapers still go out. People still go through grocery stores. They're still propped up there where you can see the headlines, regardless of how much the Star Tribune's readership has plummeted over the course of several years. And it's not just the Star Tribune. These stories are echoed across all of the major news outlets here in Minnesota, here in Minneapolis. All because they want to keep ICE and Metro Surge top of mind because, as I keep hammering, they don't have anything else to run on. And right now, they're trying to help the Democrats as best they can. These are their buddies. These are the individuals that they hang out with in their social circles. These are the individuals that they have hammering them via their texts, feeding them information, stories to run, like the ones pushing back on the $9 billion figure. And it's a bummer, man, because I use the content. I have content coming up from Channel 5 that I'm going to use. They do some great investigative reporting. It's fantastic. But it's unfortunately that bias ends up showing through in other reporting. And that's partly why you actually do see some fair reporting, because I think in the minds of a lot of the local media outlets, they think, well, hey, look, we're doing both. We're covering these things over here and doing these investigative reports and exposing new fraud like ghost students in colleges. But make no mistake, that is still mentally tied with conservatives, not with Democrats. It's tied to conservatives pouncing and caring about this issue that only ends up hurting Democrats. So I'm convinced it only gets coverage because this is the fair and balanced nature, when the truth of the matter is, no, that's genuine reporting and good investigative work to expose this fraud that affects everybody here in Minnesota, regardless of your political affiliation. But I believe they use it as an excuse, so when they pump out their propaganda pieces, pushing back on dollar amounts for fraud, they can all feel better about themselves, acting like, hey, listen, we're covering all our bases on this, and we're an incredibly fair and accurate outlet. A lot of ICE news to share, including there will be no extradition for the ICE officer that's currently being detained in Texas. I have audio of Texas Governor Greg Abbott concerns that this ICE agent may try to head to Mexico. He's in love, apparently. So I'll give you details on that, and we'll get back to more of your thoughts from the Blaster line this morning at 612-584-4565. Drop me an email, john.justice@americanexperiment.org.
If you would like to support the John Justice Show, become an advertiser. For more details, email john.justice@americanexperiment.org.
It's John Justice, and you've probably gone through the yo-yo dieting. That was the case for me, but not anymore. You lose a few pounds, it all comes back, and more. You lose a few pounds, and it all comes back, and even more. If that's been your life, NutraWave was built for you. It certainly was for me. I've lost over 25 pounds on this amazing program. NutraWave turns on the fat burning, reignites your energy, and it's all natural. There's no pills, there's no shots, there's no excuses. It actually helps you change your relationship with food just through the process of the program. 31,000 people across the metro have tried everything else, and NutraWave is where they got their life back. And NutraWave is accepting a limited number of new people. So call and mention the word strike, and you get a $272 value Truth Metabolic Scan and a red light therapy session. I've done it. It's incredibly effective. Nothing to lose and everything to gain, but you're going to lose the weight and you're not going to put it back on. Individual results may vary. So call today at 952-260-1965. That's 952-260-1965. Remember, no pills, no shots, just results. NutraWave, there's nothing else like it. Results may vary. NutraWave is not a medical treatment. Consult your physician before starting any weight loss program.
All the special interests are represented in St. Paul. But who speaks for you? Center of the American Experiment does. Our policy fellows dig into the tough issues that matter to you and offer common sense solutions on education, taxes, crime, and energy. American Experiment is the trusted, nonpartisan voice of Minnesotans like you. We are working every day to make Minnesota a better, safer, more prosperous place. We are American Experiment. Go to americanexperiment.org to learn more.
It's John Justice, and farmers, small business owners say they're expanding in the Dakotas, Wisconsin, and Iowa instead of Minnesota. Michelle Tafoya was on the show recently to talk about what it would take to actually bring those businesses back to Minnesota.
That uncertainty is something I can't deal with, so I'm not expanding here. I'm taking business elsewhere. I hear that not just from the agriculture community, John. I hear it from small businesses all over the state who will not expand here because either the regulations are too burdensome, the tax is too punitive, or it's just so much easier and friendlier to go to Wisconsin, Iowa, or South Dakota, or North Dakota.
How do you go about tackling those particular issues?
Well, I think there are levers that can be pulled in the federal government. You know, you say no to the death tax. You protect step-up values for farmers, step-ups. And you try, look, I hate to keep coming back to fraud, but we got to keep coming back to fraud because we have lost so much money in this state. And so, yeah, taxes are going to go up. That's a surcharge on the fraud, folks. When you lose that much money, how are you going to regain it? Because it's not coming back from wherever it went. It is not, sadly. And we can try and maybe we'll get a few $100,000 or a few million, but it's not coming back. So taxes are way too high. There are influences that you can make from the federal government. You can say to Minnesota and every other state in the country, if you don't up front have fraud prevention, pieces in place for this federal program, and you want federal dollars, and you don't have a way to address fraud, and you have a track record that shows you haven't addressed fraud, and there are no guardrails in place, you're not getting the federal dollars. So get your act together and get these things to where you're not going to be losing people's money and be careless with it. Stewardship matters.
Think about it. Now that school's back in session, how are Minnesota students doing? Not very well. Minnesota ACT scores fell again last year and are the lowest they've been in 10 years. In fact, fewer than half of Minnesota students can either read or do math at grade level. Think about it. We used to brag about our schools. Now we're losing to states like Mississippi. Visit americanexperiment.org for more information. Think About It is brought to you by Center of the American Experiment, Minnesota's think tank.
All right, before we turn our attention over to the continued push to bring Operation Metro Surge back to the forefront of voters' minds here in Minnesota, I'm not kidding. You would think that the ICE operations were happening right now, based off of the level of coverage that we have seen coming from local media outlets over Operation Metro Surge. I know that we've had stories, right? The the desire for Thief Ellison, Scary Moriarty to extradite this ICE officer that was involved in basically saying that the untruths. I think that's the way the DOJ described it. I'll get into it in the article. Regarding the individual that was here illegally, the shots that were fired, one of the shots going through a house. Nobody was injured in all of this. But you have Scary Moriarty and Thief Ellison desperate to extradite this guy back to Minnesota so they can continue to exploit this controversy relating to this particular ICE agent. And the judge has denied the ability of that to happen. So you do have legitimate stories relating to what had taken place via Operation Metro Surge. But it does not warrant the level of nonstop new coverage that we've been seeing. Every single media outlet has been grabbing any article relating to ICE whatsoever and crafting it in such a way as to make it look like this is an ongoing issue here in the state of Minnesota. I'll get to this in just a moment. I did have some comments that rolled in to the blaster line regarding our previous conversations as it revolves around fraud. And the two things are tied, as we talked about with that Savage raid that took place. I believe this was an immigrant family that was involved in this fraud that Alpha News had previously spoken with a homeowner in that neighborhood who had been documented the oddities, for lack of a better way to go and describe it, that had been taking place in this neighborhood. And arrest warrants were issued yesterday because it looks like they may have been involved in some Medicaid-funded, taxpayer-provided services. And so there is an overlap here because that was not the only warrant that was executed in the metro yesterday by federal law enforcement agents. But again, you would not have even have been aware of that if it hadn't been for the reporting done by Alpha News. None of the other local media outlets even grabbed onto that story as far as I saw this morning. So let's get to a few of your thoughts from the blaster line here on the John Justice Show, presented by American Experiment.
Just think, none of this fraud would have happened if someone was paying attention at how much these different organizations needed more each year, from hundreds of thousands to millions of dollars. Someone would have just followed the money to see where it was going.
Yeah, it was you're right. And we've talked about this on the show. It was a lack of curiosity, or a willful lack of curiosity to see the year-over-year funding increases coming from these Medicaid service providers that makes no sense whatsoever. Like when you have requests, say, at $2, $3, $4 million for autism services one year, and then that jumps to 25, 30, 40 million the next year. Did a whole bunch of autistic children suddenly arrive? Did they do a really good marketing campaign? Yeah, it doesn't make any sense. But that's what happened. Individuals that raised concerns at the local Minnesota state government level, a lot of times they were told by their superiors that, oh, we'll handle it. Or they just ended up ignoring it outright. Only when it became a news story that could not be ignored anymore did Governor Dim Walz address the issue. And then even then, when the exposure got so bad, it was not enough to save his next run for governor, which led to him having to bow out.
Very good.
Yeah, exactly. All right, let's go back to the blaster line at 612-584-4565.
Hey, John, as someone that works in the medical field, something needs to change. There's either a lot of people in Minnesota still on Medicare and Medicaid, not being a legal citizen, or they are somehow getting a citizenship without being able to speak a lick of English. I don't understand how it's possible. I mean, the first one I get, being in Minnesota, but the second one, I don't understand. So, I mean, that's definitely something someone that has time should be looking into, because I see it a dozen times a day.
Yeah, I bet you do. I bet you do. And the state is in a tough spot, because there's a part of me regarding the fraud, and I've thought about this a lot. I don't think I've mentioned it much on the show, but like, there's a part of me that says, just shut it all down. Shut it all down. And we've done that in a few cases. We had this reapply program that moved forward when it came to some of these service providers that were called into question. And even then, with that program, it was determined that some like 25 to 30, if not more % didn't bother to reapply. And so the argument was that, hey, these were individuals that potentially could have been committing acts of fraud that decided to bail out of the system. But the point I'm trying to make is, I wish that we could just shut everything down until we get full confirmation of all these programs being legitimate and on the up and up. But unfortunately, if you do that, you do end up harming the legitimate services that actually exist. And we've already seen a lot of stories surrounding those services that do require Medicaid dollars, that do require taxpayer funding, that are actually following the letter of the law, that have been swept up in all of this. So much of this could be taken care of, though, with a level of manpower just going out and inspecting these places. You probably need a lot of manpower. But when it comes, like that neighbor who reported those services, I mean, it would be pretty easy, and I think appropriate, if you had those tasked within the Minnesota state government to go out and to investigate any service provider that requires Medicaid dollars that may be determined to be questionable. And if those questions on paper are confirmed via what you're seeing visually, then yeah, shut down the funding over suspicions and then investigate it. I bet you would probably have about 99.9% accuracy in going and identifying the different places that are conducting acts of fraud if you just did that. Much in the same way, I'm basically saying what Nick Shirley was doing in his investigations. I'm basically laying out what Alpha News was doing in their prior investigations, even before Nick Shirley got in on the action. That being said, you have hundreds upon hundreds of these service providers out there that would need to be investigated. But I think with just a little bit of common sense, you could probably just shut down the ones you need to investigate while keeping the legitimate ones open. Or just maybe go the other way on it. I'm just spitballing all kinds of ideas. Go the other way on it. Tell those service providers that are being called into question where there are suspicions of fraud, tell the legitimate ones, hey, let us know who you are, and we will come and inspect you, and then everybody else will go and call into question. That's a better idea. I like that. None of this is going to happen, by the way. Be awesome if it did, though. If I was in charge, this is why I'm never going to run for office, because there's no way I'd ever win. 612-584-4565. John.justice@AmericanExperiment.org. ICE, so this was the headline yesterday. You ready for this? This is fantastic. So yesterday, lead story in the Star Tribune, ICE is still arresting people in Minnesota, but the tactics have changed. Tactics haven't changed. Okay, they may have changed a little bit, but what the headline wants you to believe is that the tactics have changed, and that's why you don't see the controversy on the street. That's why you don't see protesters. That's why nobody's getting injured. That's why it's not dominating the news cycle. No, it's not the case at all. It's not dominating the news cycle because there aren't people going out there and getting in the way of ICE, because Democrats aren't out there pushing people to go and get in the way of ICE. What happened to all those observational groups that were monitoring all the ICE activity? Did their funding dry up? How much of that was attached to USAID? So the headline yesterday with the big scary ICE picture, ICE is still arresting people in Minnesota, but the tactics have changed. Since Operation Metro Surge ended, most ICE detainments focused on people released from jails and prisons. Oh, yeah, see, so this is why they're not out tearing apart communities. They're arresting people that were already in jail. Underneath that lead story, bold, black-lettered headline with the scary picture of ICE were these two headlines. ICE arrests jumped nearly 50,000 in July, the second highest monthly total of Trump's second term. ICE officer charged with shooting in Minnesota could be released from jail. Those were the three headline stories in the Minnesota Star Tribune yesterday. This morning when I got up, front page, judge, ICE agent arrested in Minnesota shooting can be released from Texas jail. Christian Castro has been held for 90 days. He was arrested for allegedly shooting Julio Cesar Sosis Celis during Operation Metro Surge and then lying about it. So that lead story included an ominous picture of ICE agents walking down a street at night, fully uniformed, helmets, face masks, walking down an icy road in Minneapolis with billowing smoke in the background as they're walking down the street. I mean, you could not have picked a better scary visual, or in my case, awesome visual of ICE agents than that photo that they included, which may or may not have been taken from the night when this whole altercation take place. And just like yesterday, the headlines underneath this story, ICE is still arresting people in Minnesota, but the tactics have changed. Minnesota sues Texas governor over delayed handover of ICE agents charged in shooting. Hennepin County's ICE prosecutions could test limits of federal power. 4 different ICE headlines this morning attached to the 3 that were there yesterday. Man, the propaganda is strong. Got to keep it top of mind. Got to keep everybody afraid. Got to keep everybody scared. Remember, ICE is bad. The Gestapo, they're an extension of the Trump administration and his kingship, his authoritarian dictatorship. And remember, they're associated with Republicans and conservatives, which means they're associated with, Michelle Tafoya, Lisa Damuth. Mm-hmm. Now, you see how all this works, right? There are some sad Democrats this morning, though, and that makes me happy. A federal judge yesterday rejected Minnesota's emergency attempt to force Texas to extradite the Immigrations and Customs Enforcement agent accused of shooting the Venezuelan man and lying about the incident, potentially clearing the way for the agent's release from jail. So Christian Castro, 52 years old, faces 4 counts of second-degree assault and 1 count of falsely reporting a crime in Minnesota over the January shooting during the immigration enforcement operation in Minneapolis. The judge denied Minnesota's request for the temporary restraining order that would have prevented the Cameron County Sheriff from releasing Castro and required Texas Governor Greg Abbott to sign an extradition warrant allowing Minnesotan authorities to take custody of him. Now, Castro has been held in Texas since May under existing Texas law. A person jailed while awaiting extradition can be held for only 90 days, meaning that Castro could be released as soon as Thursday, according to the Associated Press. Now, it still remains to be seen what's going to happen with this. We do know that there was another story this week that said the DOJ was looking into his case. So it would seem that he probably is not just going to be released, although it could still happen. And I'm going to make an argument about why it may need to happen. You may be scratching your head going, well, but he lied about it. Yeah, I'll get to that. Minnesota Attorney General Keith Ellison sued Abbott last week. I said thief, not the Star Tribune. They said Keith. Thief just rolls off the tongue better, and it's more appropriate, in my opinion. He sued Abbott last week to compel Castro's extradition and sought the temporary restraining order in order to prevent his release while the dispute played out. Now, there's also a fear that Castro is a flight risk. And to that audio that I mentioned from KSTP and Channel 5, here is a bit of what they were reporting yesterday. This is Lindsey Brown at KSTP talking about this very issue.
Christian Castro is set to be released from a Texas jail, and Minnesota officials say they're concerned he could flee the country. So why do Minnesota officials say they're worried specifically about Mexico? I'm Lindsey Brown. Let's dig into the court filings. Castro is the ICE agent facing felony charges in Minnesota after an off-duty shooting during Operation Metro Surge. He's been held in Cameron County, Texas, right near the Mexican border. And in court filings, Minnesota says investigators found something in Castro's jail calls. They say Castro has been in frequent contact with a woman in Mexico and talked about marrying her and buying a house in Mexico after his release. That's why Minnesota Attorney General Keith Ellison has argued Castro is a flight risk. A federal judge acknowledged today that Castro could flee the country, but said that risk alone wasn't enough for the court to step in and stop his release. Now, none of this means Castro will go to Mexico. It's just the evidence that Minnesota officials are using to say they're concerned he could. And that is why Mexico has now become a big part of the story.
Hey, good morning, John. This ICE thing. I guarantee once school starts in Minneapolis, the whistle brigade vest-wearing idiots will be standing on the corners around the schools again, even though there's absolutely no reason to do that. They did it up to the last day of school last summer. I saw it every day. It was such a joke. Virtue signaling idiots. Have a great day. Hope to see you at the fair on Saturday.
Yeah, I hope to see you there, too. And somebody had asked if we were broadcasting live or streaming it. No, we're not broadcasting live at the fair on Saturday. We'll just be there live at the booth. We have the Wheel of Wrong Track Minnesota, where you can find out the ways that we're on track or off track. And then with that, you get prizes, which is pretty cool. Right? So the Democrats' failures become your gain at the Minnesota State Fair. Just came up with that on the fly. Right? It's one of the reasons why they hired me over here at American Experiment. That's right. Just one. Not all the reasons.
Who brought us this nightmare? The Democratic Party did.
That's right.
All over the country, it's the Democrats who bring this crap to our states and to our country. I hope when the people vote, and there's a lot of dummies out there, they don't vote Democrat again. They vote Republican.
Yeah, I hope they do too. I hope they do too. But remember, the Democrats, as I talked about earlier in the show, right, your typical Democrat has been slow walking communism throughout the years because they know that it's not widely accepted, right, among the majority of individuals. But the new brand of Democrats, those DSA members, they've been indoctrinated through our public education system, and they want that communism now, and they're not hiding it. They're making it known. My gosh, I saw a post from somebody the other day talking about, and somebody had said, like, now that New York is healing under Zohran Mamdani, I'm like, so delusional. And all that is are individuals that have made a comfy life for themselves, are probably not impacted by the everyday, changes that take place at the local level, probably haven't seen a change much in their lifestyle at all. They just accept at face value the rhetoric that gets presented before them, and they just believe it. Their life is great, so that must be because of Zohran Mamdani, right? Mm-hmm. Okay. Let's go here. I want to finish up the story about this ICE agent. So in January, getting back to what had happened, in January, Castro allegedly fired a gun into the home in North Minneapolis with the intent to cause fear or immediate bodily harm or death to the 4 adults who were just inside the door. This was according to Hennepin County Attorney Scary Moriarty during the May news conference. The bullet hit a Venezuelan migrant, Julio Sosa Celis, in the leg before it traveled through a closet and into the wall of a child's bedroom. Scary situation, absolutely. I do believe that Julio Celis was illegal alien, but still, scary situation. Now, Castro allegedly falsely told federal investigators that Sosa Celis and another man assaulted him with a broom handle and a snow shovel, prompting him to fire his gun in self-defense. The Department of Homeland Security initially claimed that Sosa Celis tried to evade arrest and began to resist and violently assault a federal officer. The department alleged that 2 individuals came out of the nearby apartment before attacking the officer with the snow shovel and the broom handle. Sosa Celis then got loose and began striking the officer with a shovel or a broomstick. Now, fearing for his life and safety, the officer fired a defensive shot that hit Sosa Celis in the leg. According to DHS, Sosa Celis and 2 others ran back into the apartment, barricaded themselves inside before ICE took them into custody. Now, then Acting Director Todd Lyons announced in February a federal probe into the incident after the video footage shown that the sworn testimony provided by two separate police officers, ICE officers, appears to have made untruthful statements, and lying under oath is a federal offense. Okay. The men and women of ICE are entrusted with upholding the rule of law and are held to the highest standards of professionalism, integrity, ethical conduct. Violations of this sacred sworn oath will not be tolerated. ICE remains fully committed to transparency, accountability, and fair enforcement of our nation's immigration laws. There's been no specificity as to exactly what order of details was untruthful in all of this. I still think that the core of what Christian Castro had dealt with in that instance was correct. Like, those are the details that unfolded. I think it's the order of events that came into play, and those are where the untruthful statements may have taken place. Now, that being said, okay, so just so we're clear, like, nobody got hurt in this circumstance. They were going and executing appropriate warrants of arrest. One could argue that none of this would have actually transpired or been a problem if it hadn't been for the ongoing on-the-street insurrectionists putting our ICE agents in a heightened state of alert at the time when all of this was going down, meaning if ICE was just able to go out there and do the job that they wanted to go and do and execute their search warrants without having any opposition, then none of this would have played out. Not justification if this ICE agent went and broke the law. Certainly not justification if this ICE agent told something that wasn't truthful, but just providing further context to all of this. But here's the thing. He's done with ICE. He's not going to be working with ICE again. He wants to leave the country, for crying out loud, according to the story. Okay. which is more than you can say for the individuals who ICE is out there trying to go and arrest who have committed crimes because they don't want to leave the country, and that's why they're there to deport them. This guy wants to self-deport, apparently. He's talking about, with a woman in Mexico, talking about buying a house. So he wants to leave, and he's been sitting in jail for 3 months. Listen, he's already endured more punishment than the majority of the individuals who have stolen your money and my money and producer Devin's money through fraud. Certainly more time than individuals on the streets of Minneapolis who've been taking part in the revolving door of criminality. There's an argument to be made. Yet, this guy's probably been through enough. I'm not saying he has. I'm just saying that there's an argument to be made that maybe in terms of whatever wrongdoing and untruth that he gave, perhaps his wanting to leave the country voluntarily, no longer working with ICE anymore, and being held in custody for 3 months, 90 days. The punishment may fit the crime, and maybe we should just let him leave. Of course, this is what the Attorney General is focused on. Oh, that and going and appeasing, gang members to make sure they don't go and fight at the Minnesota State Fair, right? So Greg Abbott, I want to play for you the clip. This was initially when he was sued by Thief Ellison and Scary Moriarty. This was the comment that he had to make regarding the lawsuit to extradite this ICE
First
officer.
First of all, I don't trust Tim Walz on anything, let alone something like this. But listen, while they're making demands, I got a demand of my own. And that is, it's time for Minnesota to step up and repay the United States of America and Americans for all the fraud that they've committed in their state.
He also posted online, you guys are such bad lawyers. You showed up unprepared, uninformed, and unpersuasive. You don't know the law, and it showed. Minnesota is the literal definition of a sanctuary state, writes Greg Abbott, the Texas governor, because you refuse to assist in enforcing immigration laws. I'll put Minnesota at the top of the list for future bus drop-offs if we ever have a president like Joe Biden again. And as somebody had emailed me a while ago, we wouldn't even be talking about any of this if it wasn't for the fact that former President Joe Biden and the Democrats allowed millions upon millions of illegal aliens to flood into the country. And let me remind you, while at the same time arresting more illegal aliens and deporting them here in Minnesota than what President Donald Trump has done since he actually launched the ICE operations at the start of his second term. But you only know that because you listen to the show. You only know that because you're paying attention. All right, we're going to continue with the theme as we officially go and kick off the, holy cow, third hour of the show already? Wow. It's a John Justice Show presented by American Experiment. Remember, we're going to be out at the State Fair, which gets underway right now. I wonder if there's anybody walking around the fair with headphones listening to the show. Wouldn't that be awesome? If you are, good morning, have a pronto pup for me since I can't have one right now. Maybe some funnel cake too. Just saying. Still losing weight on the Neutral Wave program. NUTRIWAVE.us. Amazing program. Call Dr. Bob today and get on it. It's done wonders and changed my life for the better. So happy start to the Minnesota State Fair. Again, 11 to 1, you can join me. But Center of the American Experiment will be out at the fair all day on Saturday in the Dan Patch area. This is what I was told yesterday. Say Dan Patch. I'm like, okay. Behind the grandstand near the Minnesotan. So shout out to my buddy Corey and the Minnesotan in White Bear Lake. Head on over there. They have amazing clothes that you will enjoy. Also, the 2026 Fall Briefing with Byron York, the Battle for Congress, taking place September 19th at the winery at Sovereign Estate. You can go to this event. All you have to do is head on over to AmericanExperiment.org and see how to go and get your tickets for that amazing event. So keeping with immigration, Got a couple more items of note before we move on to some other issues, including how the 2023 trifecta hiked your property taxes. We've heard a ton about the raising of property taxes. I laid out a part of the scenario relating to immigration here in the country and the number of individuals that are occupying those homes and how we don't have a housing shortage. We have an affordability. The ability to purchase a home is hard, especially for young couples right now. And if we tackle our illegal immigration situation, continue with these deportations, move towards more mass deportations, you're going to see a lot of these houses freed up. You're going to see the home values plummet. You're going to see the prices plummet. But also, John Phelan, at Center of the American Experiment, policy fellow, gets into why locally here in Minnesota, the property taxes are going up even further than they are in other places around the country. So we'll get into that coming up this hour on the show. I want to go here, though, as we continue the conversation about the left keeping ICE in the news, including the Minnesota Truth Council has convened. I'll have details on that. This brought to you by the same dim walls that brought the COVID snitch line. Now brings you the Minnesota Truth Council that seeks to establish a public record about Metro Surge that's bipartisan, using Judge Peter Cahill, who's probably the most partisan judge in the entire state of Minnesota, maybe even within the Midwest. So that's coming up. At Rapid Response 47 on X posted this yesterday, and I wanted to share this with you. It's easy to forget. This is what they write. It's easy to forget where we were just 2 years ago. So recapping just what's happened under the Trump administration over the course of the past week. So as we've talked about several times, you have ICE arrests surging to nearly 50,000 in July, the highest monthly total. DHS is proposing a $103,000 fee on HB1 visa petitions. Yes, please. You see, this would ensure that the individuals coming and taking advantage of these programs are the best and the brightest and the ones that are going to positively contribute to the betterment of the United States of America and the values that you and I hold so dear. The State Department, this has all happened again just this week. The State Department moving to revoke the tourist and business visas of up to 200,000 people who came as visitors and then filed for asylum. It's the largest action in American history. And we documented earlier this week. If you missed it, be sure to get caught up on the podcast available either on the MixLR app or on whatever podcast platform that you listen to the show on. And of course, the video replay available on Facebook and YouTube at Center of the American Experiment. But we went through and broke down the background of many of the individuals who are being returned to their country of origin under the temporary protected status. And again, we're talking about the worst of the worst. Just this past week, the Supreme Court, as we've discussed, cleared the way for President Trump's mail-in ballot order to take effect before the midterms. DHS this week can build a federal citizenship list and send it to the states, while the Attorney General can prioritize the prosecutions of officials who give ballots to ineligible voters. Philadelphia's Federal Manufacturing Survey showed that American factories are having the strongest current conditions in more than 5 years. Manufacturer expectations for the future surged to the highest level since the beginning of the Reagan boom in 1983, with the biggest one-year jump ever recorded. Yeah, that's right. That's what we're cheering for. That's right. In 14 days this month, ICE arrested almost 1,500 people in Virginia and Maryland alone, including 400 with convictions and pending charges for crimes for sexual battery, kidnapping, robbery, attempted murder, rape, and MS-13 members in one of the most successful operations ever. That's right. That's what we're cheering for. And that's all just within the past week. Yeah. This is what accountability looks like. This is what accountability sounds like. Oh, but you wouldn't know that listening to, and this is why you see such ridiculous, over-the-top rhetoric coming from those prominent hack Democrats because of the successes that President Donald Trump has done just in the course of the past week and month. This is why you have individuals like Democrat Senator Chris Murphy sitting down for interviews talking about the invasion that Democrats allowed of criminal illegal aliens who committed violent crimes against America. He says it's not a real problem, while I have a secondary clip talking about how he wants to handle the problem that he just said minutes earlier wasn't a problem. We'll start here.
What can and should be done to solve this problem? Well, I guess you first have to identify what the problem is. The problem, according to the Trump administration, is a country that has been invaded, a country that is at risk physically because of the presence of people from other countries. That is a fake problem. That is not a real problem. Nobody likes to hear this.
It is a fake problem. It's not a real problem, although that fake problem, he says he still wants to address in the same conversation that Senator Chris Murphy was having from the previous
Gina
clip.
from Sherman asks a question that's much more pointed than any I would probably ask, which is, does Senator Murphy support abolishing ICE? Well, you're going to have to tear down ICE and rebuild it. So this version of ICE should not remain or come back if Democrats control the presidency or Congress. I believe that you have to have a domestic mechanism to enforce immigration laws. But this ICE, I think, is now so delegitimized in the eyes of the American public that it cannot continue as the enforcer of immigration law.
And these are the vapid, shallow words lacking any context that continue to get repeated by those on the left. First off, he just said it wasn't a problem, but then he said he needs an enforcement mechanism to solve the problem, but it's not ICE because ICE is broken. This is the same version of ICE that was deployed under Joe Biden. Based on the current data, a little more than half of the current ICE agents are the same agents that served under Joe Biden. Now, President Donald Trump did go and increase the number of ICE agents, and there was some shortening of the training that was done to those ICE agents. But if you actually look at the data and you actually look at what was shortened in terms of the training, it wasn't anything relating to the actual physical enforcement of the actions they were taking. There was a shortening of things like language classes. The portions of the training program for ICE agents that take the longest period of time because they require memorization. The focus was on the tactics that the current ICE agents and the same ICE agents that were operating under Joe Biden already knew. That training was still as foundational and as extensive as it always has been. The training where they actually cut some corners because they needed to get ICE agents on the street to handle the millions of illegals that the Joe Biden administration let in, it wasn't training that was crucial or even necessary for these agents to go through to do the comprehensive work of dealing with illegal aliens and those that had committed acts of criminal behavior. I have one more for you. Adelita Grijalva, following in the footsteps of her radical leftist communist father, Raul Grijalva, had this to say recently during an event.
I believe ICE should be abolished. There is no reform for a system that is completely fundamentally corrupt. There is a failure, systemic failure, and it needs systemic change. What has happened in our communities and the lawlessness of this agency, there is no reform. We need to look at modernization of our ports of entry, and I do not believe ICE has a role in that.
This was nothing but a cacophony of buzzwords meant to invoke an emotional reaction without any basis in fact and context. The left created the controversy surrounding ICE, pushed ICE into circumstances they otherwise never would have had to go and deal with, and that is evident in the fact that the ICE operations here in Minnesota and across the country continue. Arrests continue to be made. Warrants continue to be executed. Illegal aliens continue to be arrested and deported, but it's not dominating the headlines because there aren't individuals out there getting in the way of what they're doing. It was just a bunch of garbage coming from Adelita Grijalva, all designed to provoke those feelings that people have. This ICE is broken. This ICE is wrong. This ICE is corrupt. It's the same ICE. What's broken, what's wrong has been the left and always been the left's reaction to it and how they choose to exploit lawful law enforcement for their own political gain. Let's get back to some of your thoughts.
You know, John, if I talked to my wife with this arrogant, condescending, elitist tonality that this Murphy clown talks to, she'd start slapping me upside the head. Rightfully so.
And let me add, there's a point I want to make going back to what we talked about last hour. So this Christian Castro that's been detained for the past 90 days in Texas, that Thief Ellison and Scary Moriarty were trying to extradite back here to Minnesota just so they can make political hay out of it, right? You had Lindsey Brown at KSTP. We played the audio earlier. I'm not going to play it again. Talking about his expected release, right? Minnesota officials say they're concerned the ICE agent Kristen Castro could leave the country. Why Mexico specifically? She breaks down the evidence that Minnesota is pointing to and what it does and doesn't mean. And basically, this guy apparently has a girlfriend, wants to marry her, wants to buy a house down in Mexico, and wants to live there. So the guy wants to self-deport. He wants to leave the country. He's no longer going to be working with ICE. And who knows whether the DOJ will keep him in custody after his supposed release. We heard earlier this week the DOJ was still looking into what actions they wanted to take against him, considering the fact that he told untruths according to the federal government. But you've got fraudsters hopping on planes back to Somalia with briefcases filled with cash. You have the revolving door of criminality in Hennepin and Ramsey County, deals being made with gangbangers, and Ellison and Scary Moriarty are worried about one ICE agent, not even from Minneapolis, who isn't even in Minnesota. To say make it make sense would be an understatement at this point in time.
Good morning, John. So Minnesota is greatly concerned about an ICE agent leaving for Mexico. But if you're a Somali fraudster, here's your passport. Don't leave the country. We have courts always in Somalia. What you gonna do?
Yeah, see?
But there's no two-tier justice system in Minnesota, right?
No two-tiered, no double standard whatsoever. Thank you for that. Let's go here to the blaster line this morning on the John Justice Show, presented by American Experiment.
Good morning, John. You're Steve here in Excelsior. Hey, did you hear that Hennepin County and Minneapolis, whatever, are holding listening sessions for people to bring their stories about ICE? And guess who's moderating these listening sessions? None other than Judge Peter Cahill, the one who presided over Chauvin's trial.
Well, thank you.
Yay.
Thank you, my Steve from Excelsior, for teeing up my next story. Couldn't have planned that better if I tried. Totally planned it, by the way. I saw it sitting there, read the transcript, waited so I could play it right before I covered the story to make it sound like it was all serendipitous. We have producer Isaac, who just I looked over and to my right now because Devin left. Good morning, Isaac.
Good morning.
You excited about the fair today?
Yeah, I forgot it was opening day.
Oh, so you're that excited?
Yeah.
So excited that you forgot that the gates are open and people are already traversing themselves through the Minnesota State Fairgrounds.
No, I'll make it there.
Yeah.
Okay.
You'll be there on Saturday, right?
I should be.
Okay. Yeah. I forgot you were. Yeah, I forgot you were like half committed when we were talking about it earlier.
I'm still kind of half committed.
Yeah. Not a big fair guy, huh?
No, I'm a big fair guy. I'm just not a big working on Saturday guy.
I think tomorrow for Freedom Friday, we're going to have a lot of fair talk. That'll make Catherine really happy. She's probably the biggest. I mean, it's so funny. Catherine is such a huge fan of the fair. Like it makes anybody else that says they're a fan of the fair is like nothing in comparison to Catherine's fandom of the fair.
She's a fan.
Yeah, she's a mega fan. So I think tomorrow we may talk about what people's favorite aspects of the fair is. So to the talkbacker's point, the Minnesota Truth Council. That's funny in and of itself. It's even funnier when you say it's established by Governor Dim Walz. They held their first public hearing to gather testimonies about Operation Metro Surge. The council, chaired by Judge Peter Cahill, as the friend of the show, Steve from Excelsior, mentioned, aims to establish a public record of the operation by October 31st. Well, that's interesting. By Halloween. That's funny. I love the holidays. I put Halloween into that category of the holidays, by the way. Okay. Somebody had said you got to make sure that I make the lights in the background orange for Halloween. Yeah, of course. It's the first thing I do when I get here is I color match the lights for those that are watching on online. No, you know what happens after Halloween? Not just like a week or so later. Yeah, it's a midterm election. Boy, I'm sure no coincidence. I'm sure it's just a coincidence that they want the results of the Minnesota Truth Council to happen on October 31st, just right before the election. This way people are informed of the bipartisan look into Operation Metro Surge. So we'll go back to audio from KSTP this morning. They reported on this Truth Council. Here is what they had to say on Channel 5.
Governor Tim Walz created the Minnesota Truth Council by executive order to find out the truth, quote unquote, about the impact Metro Surge had on Minnesotans. But at a time when most people cannot agree on what is the truth on just about anything, it won't be easy.
The purpose being to create a comprehensive record.
The Minnesota Truth Council held its first public hearing Wednesday.
These dehumanization words, and basically
there was some emotional testimony as people described trauma they faced when 4,000 ICE and Border Patrol agents converged on Minnesota. The focus will be on the impact Operation Metro Surge had on Minnesotans. Hundreds of stories have been collected through the Truth Council website. How do you go about trying to determine what is the truth in an era when two sides can rarely agree on what is the truth?
We will see trends. We will see things that are commonalities. And I think that will tell you what the truth is. When we hear the same thing from different people, we know.
I'll play more of this here in just a moment. What a farce. What a total and complete farce this is. I can take my commentary relating into the investigation of January 6th and just take all that and apply it right to this ridiculous, stupid farce of a truth council. There's no truth that will be involved in any of this. This is the Minnesota leftist Marxist narrative council. How do we continue to perpetuate the leftist view and narrative that is completely false and try to convince people that that's our truth? That's what this is. This is their truth that is rooted in anything but that. I can take care of this for them. You want to know the truth? Here's the truth. If you didn't have a bunch of morons taking to the streets, getting in the way of lawful law enforcement, then we probably wouldn't even have known that ICE was on the ground here in Minnesota. And even if we did know, if you didn't have idiots going out there and getting in their way after being urged by our elected officials, they would come in, they would execute their arrests and search warrants. They would arrest these individuals. They would have been done in a quarter of the time, and they would have been out of the state of Minnesota, and nobody would have died. That's your truth. Argue with me. Tell me I'm wrong. Prove to me that I'm wrong. If you didn't have a bunch of jackwagons going out there acting like they were the Star Wars rebellion, for crying out loud, going so far as to actually adopt the imagery because they fancied themselves as a bunch of resistance freedom fighters in Birkenstocks and beanies, armed with cell phones, acting like a bunch of morons getting in the way of lawful law enforcement, blocking the law enforcement officers with their vehicles, running them over, kicking out taillights, spitting on them, screaming at them, not getting out of the way when lawful law enforcement told them to get out of the way, then none of this would have happened. The individuals who were targeted for arrest, murderers, pedophiles, rapists, thieves, fraudsters, would have been properly arrested. ICE would have done their business. They would have left, and that would have been the end of it. I can prove that I'm right because it's been happening for the course of the past few months. More arrests in the month of July of illegal aliens under ICE than in the entirety of since the operation started nationwide, and you weren't even aware of it until I told you on the show. And I only found out and told you on the show because I wasn't aware of it until after July was over, and we were told that that happened. And why wasn't anybody aware? Because you didn't have moron, ignorant, yeah, I'm being redundant, but it's the one that keeps sticking into my head, radicalized, wannabe, quasi-communists and communists out there telling people to go and get in the way of ICE. There, I just saved the taxpayers, I don't even know how much money, for this farce of a truth council.
We know that it's going to be the truth.
Retired Judge Peter Cahill, best known for presiding over the Derek Chauvin trial, says the goal is to keep the council proceedings as non-political as possible.
And Cahill has got to be, again, one of the most vindictive leftist judges in the Midwest. Adding to the sentencing of an individual involved on the day that George Floyd died, just because he didn't like the fact that he ended up using religious commentary surrounding what was happening to him. Yeah, you get the most vindictive judge in Cahill to go and run your truth council. Keeping with the Star Wars references, it would be like Darth Vader. It would be like Palpatine. We're going to have a truth council to find out what's going on with the rebellion, and it's going to be spearheaded by let's see, who do we got? We can use Vader. He can go and spearhead it. Let's get some stormtroopers in here too. They can go ahead and handle it. Are there any Inquisitors nearby? They've been involved in stuff. Let's get some of them here in too. Is anybody from the light side going to be involved in this? No, nothing but Empire sympathetic and dark side affiliated individuals. Nobody from the rebellion or light side to get to the truth of what has been taking place across the galaxy. It'll be totally bipartisan, says Palpatine, as Darth Vader leads the Galactic Truth Council.
He says anyone is invited to testify, from people in the immigrant community to ICE agents.
Our job for these 4 public meetings is actually just to listen and note trends and commonalities and avoid the partisanship.
The governor's executive order requires a final report to be issued by the council by October 31st. At the state capitol, Tom Hauser, Eyewitness News on 45.
I can already tell you the results, and I'll save this version of the Truth Council time. I'll tell you the results. ICE is bad. Trump is worse. The GOP is complicit because they didn't care. Immigrant communities suffered. Fraud will be overshadowed, and there will be a massive dollar amount attached to Operation Metro Surge that they will blame on everything that I mentioned before that will overshadow the dollar amount. You see the setup here? I talked about the story earlier from Channel 5 and about how Tom Hauser at Channel 5 was trying to downplay by gaming the numbers, that it's not really $9 billion in fraud. It's really only tangibly $230 million. Why do you think that's happening? It's happening because of this, in part. Because when this Truth Council comes up with their number, it is going to be significantly larger than the $230 million that the mainstream media that's in the tank for the Democrats wants you to believe is the actual number of fraud. Then they're going to go and say, Operation Metro Surge cost the state of Minnesota taxpayers more money than the fraud did here in Minnesota. You can bank on it. That's what this is about. October 31st. Give me a break. I would have given it a modicum of credit if they had waited till after the election to get the results they wanted. But nope, they're not even trying to hide the bias. They're not even trying to hide the propaganda. They are forecasting the propaganda that they intend to perpetuate and that every single media outlet is going to run with, apart from places like here at American Experiment, Alpha News. Just you watch. It's all one big, massive setup. The fraud was only $230, maybe $300 million, not $9 billion. But guess what? Operation Metro Surge, that cost us $3 billion. And here is what the Truth Council discovered. And we have all the facts and the figures to back up our data. Just you wait and see. Let's go back to the blaster line this morning here on the John Justice Show.
Hey, John, going back to your question of where have all the protesters gone, I live near a busy intersection in Richfield, and even before Metro Surge, there were protesters out there every Saturday around noon, and sometimes on weekdays during rush hour, doing their No Kings thing, being annoying, whatever. And ever since those Antifa busts about a couple months ago, I don't know, it seems maybe the money's dried up to pay those people, because I have not seen them out there once since those Antifa network arrests.
There is a fascinating correlation between a lot of different aspects in life, things that have changed dramatically, that really the only thing that you can point to is the drying up of taxpayer money being funneled through the grift that was occurring through the USAID funds, whether it's the protests, whether it is the change in the viewership and the listenership of left-wing podcasts and social media. There are individuals that are compiling this information out there, and I can't wait until they bring forward some of the results regarding that, because you make a great point. And a lot of other people have expressed, and I've even noticed that typically this time of year is when you get a lot of these massive on-the-street protests of a number of different issues. We saw it happen recently, in recent years with the colleges and pro-Palestine and all that nonsense, and it's just non-existent. And a lot of people are saying it's because the funding mechanisms that were coming through the federal government have all but dried up, and so the money's not there.
The Truth Council is so obviously and blatantly just a rewriting of history through the lens of leftists. I'm old enough to remember during the Summer of Love riots in Minneapolis when people were live streaming their protests when they went on to the I-35 bridge, and that semi came rolling down, and people were claiming that it was all a setup. The police were boxing them in and they were going to kill everybody. And the semi was a part of that. Like, good grief. We know exactly what's going to come out of this Truth Council, and it's all going to be BS. It's going to be, ICE was murdering people and hiding the bodies. Give me a break.
Yeah, just wait. Just wait. That's going to be the dollar amount. Everything that the blast mentioned is true. ICE is bad. Trump is worse. Republicans are complicit. There will be no commentary regarding the rhetoric that came from Thief Ellison, from Minneapolis Man, Baby Mary, Mom Jeans, Jacob Fry, from Governor Tim Walz. I would be fine, just like I was with the January 6th investigations. If you want to do a thorough top to bottom investigation, including all of the facets of what took place, I'm fine with that. Let's do it. But I already told you earlier what the outcome would be. The outcome would be, if you actually did that we wouldn't have had the problems, no money would have been wasted, and lives probably wouldn't have been lost if people had just stayed home. What ICE was doing was lawful. It wasn't unconstitutional. It wasn't unlawful. What the left did was successfully convince a bunch of broken and brainwashed individuals, radicalize them to the point to take to the streets to put ICE in positions while doing their regular job that they never would have been in if it hadn't been for what those elected officials had encouraged or not encouraged. Encouraged by not encouraging. That happened a lot too. Just like Minneapolis Man, Baby Mayor, Mom Jeans, Jacob Fry heading into the weekend was like, hey, everybody, this horrible, racist, Nazi-affiliated, white supremacist, January 6th insurrectionist Jake Lang is going to be holding this incredibly offensive protest in downtown Minneapolis this Saturday at noon. But don't go there. You avoid this horrible Nazi-affiliated white supremacist racist. You avoid him between the hours of noon and 2 at this location. The weather is supposed to be beautiful, but don't go there. A lot of that happened during Metro Surge as well. Let's get back to some of your thoughts from the Blaster line.
Hey, John, Jeff from Cambridge. I'm actually excited for this Truth Council. It's got to be the truth, and that's what they say it is. Everything's true when they say it is, right? But anyway, I really hope that ICE actually does show up and starts arresting illegals right at that Truth Council.
Oh, I can't even imagine if that were to end up happening. Thank you for the blast, though. I appreciate it.
Hey, John, great show as always. If they really wanted to have a truth council, they would also list how many criminals were removed from Minnesota. But I don't see that happening.
Yeah, there's
Thank
that
you.
too. Yeah, with the Truth Council, how much time do you think will be spent going through the list of the background of the individuals that were actually taken into custody and deported by our brave ICE agents? You think that's going to be a part of it? You think there's going to be a comprehensive list like what we shared in previous iterations of the show of the murderers, pedophiles, rapists, thieves, and fraudsters that were arrested and deported during these operations? You think that'll be a portion of the Truth Council to show the good that ICE did? Do you think there will be any discussion of the good that ICE did during Metro Surge? No, the whole thing is based off the premise that Trump was wrong and that ICE was bad. I mean, there is no way this Truth Council there's no way that it can be bipartisan. It is impossible. The fact that the Truth Council exists in and of itself, it ends up just being in total and complete conflict with itself. The two things cannot exist at the same time. The Minnesota Truth Council and a bipartisan look at Operation Metro Surge, no, they are completely 100% incompatible.
John, this meeting's got your name written all over it.
Okay, I had to stop there, so please don't yell into the blasts. Just sure. We have enough problem with blaster audio. I don't need yelling into it. Let's go here.
Hey, John, Mr. Humble here. I found you. Boy, you're back on the air. Wonderful. Hey, the Minnesota Truth Council. Can you say 1984?
Yeah.
Get a clue. Great to hear you. Bye.
How did you find me, by the way? I need to know. We're looking at promoting the show. I'm serious about this. So I'm genuinely, because I've had a lot of people as of late that have been finding the show, and I'm just curious how they have been going about finding the show. So if you just recently found the show, if you could drop me either a blast or an email, john.justice@americanexperiment.org, that would be incredibly helpful to our efforts as we continue to promote the John Justice Show here, presented by American Experiment. Let's get back to your blast this morning.
Good morning, John. Victor here. This whole doing that thing with my fingers, Truth Council, where they plainly admit if you repeat the lie enough times, it becomes the truth.
Yeah.
Is the most ridiculous thing because that's all they're doing. Well, we're just listening to how many times people say a thing. And if a lot of people say the same thing, then that's the truth. We're not going to worry about the actual truth. That is why this whole your truth is not real, because your truth is whatever you want it to be.
And they need to set up, and another reason for this too, because you know it's going to be completely partisan, bogus nonsense. I laid it all out. But the other part of this too is that it does go and help provide cover in the closing days of the general election for the Democrats, Peggy Flanagan, for Amy Klobuchar, to then point to the Truth Council to just reinforce the bias that already exists in their current commentary. I mean, you can hear it already. Peggy Flanagan's going to do it a lot worse than Amy Klobuchar. Amy Klobuchar is a little bit more seasoned, that's an understatement, than Peggy Flanagan is. But the rhetoric's going to be, don't just take my word for it. We just had the Minnesota Truth Council reach these conclusions. And I'm going to hit it again. One of them is going to be Operation Metro Surge cost the people of Minnesota more money than the fraud did. Just wait. It's all being teed up. There's no reason these two things are not existing in the same timeline except for that reason. This whole ridiculous push to try to downplay the $9 billion number is for this reason. Now, it's for a lot of different reasons. It's just to downplay the fraud in general because it is still generally speaking viewed as a conservative Republicans pounce issue. So there's that aspect of it. It is beneficial to Democrats between now and November to downplay and take down the amount of money that was actually stolen from you, to lessen how important and how bad the fraud has been. But this is also going to be another part of it. They're going to say that Operation Metro Surge costs more money. And that's an easy thing for them to come up with because it's all arbitrary. We already saw this happen to the city of Minneapolis. Man, baby Mayor Mom Jeans Jacob Fry and the city council over there came up with some ridiculous multi-million-dollar number attached to the amount of money and revenue lost in Minneapolis because of Metro Surge. And you can basically just come up with any data point you want at all to reach the conclusion that you're looking for. All right, let's go back to the blaster line at 612-584-4565. And our lawyer friend of the show, James Dickey, is chiming in this morning.
Hey, John, it's James Dickey. I'm just interested to know whether this Truth Council about the Metro Surge operation is going to also take testimony from the ICE agents who had to deal with a bunch of theater kids running around in the street blowing whistles at them while they're trying to apprehend people who are illegally in this country and subject to deportation. I think that would be interesting to have all the evidence in front of the Truth Council if it is in fact in search of the truth.
It's so incredibly tragic that people lost their lives, but Democrats only have themselves to blame over this. Think about how radicalized you would need to be to go out and get in the way of law enforcement conducting the actions that they're conducting and thinking that you're not going to be facing consequences for that. You worked so hard to have the life that you had, in the case of Alex Preddy being in the medical field, and yet you were willing to go and throw it all away to go out and do what? Kick out the taillights and spit on ICE agents and ultimately get in their way and not move when they told you to move and you end up losing your life for it? I mean, was that worth it? I'm going to venture a guess no. I'm sure the family doesn't feel that way. And the same thing with Renee Good. But it tells you how radicalized these individuals have become. And that's not just from the timeline of when this started and the commentary coming from elected officials. No, that is years of indoctrination taking place. And this is what I talked about at the first hour of the show. Be sure to check out the podcast if you missed it. The Democrats in the DSA, it's the same people. Same mentality, at least. Not the same people. Same mentality. But your typical Democrat wants communism, just like your DSA Democrat does. But your typical Democrat knows that they need to do it in a slow approach to get the American public and America to accept it. And yeah, you run the risk of losing elections and losing some ground. But to go fully ahead with your radical communist issues and policies and lawmaking, it's not going to be accepted by the American public. But they have indoctrinated the next generation of voters living in a world now with the fear of missing out and instant gratification. They've now bought into this communism, believe that this is the way the country should go, that we should try to undermine and ultimately remove the United States Constitution so they can build this fictitious utopian society based under the rule of communism in which people will probably die. But they want it now because they want instant gratification. They don't want to wait anymore. So the Democrats created this problem in their own party of this new DSA and these communists taking it over. And this is why they keep expressing this sort of big tent mentality. So the individuals that took to the streets to get in the way of ICE and to go so far as to actually get in physical confrontations, this wasn't a spur of the moment just because I showed up here. No, this was years of radicalizing coming from the left. 612-584-4565. Let's go back to the blaster line before we switch topics this morning here on the John Justice Show.
Good morning, John. Rich here. Holy cheese and rice. Tim Walz is starting the Truth Council. Can you imagine that? He must have been reading 1984.
Yeah. No, it was all done by design. How do we tee up the issue right before the election? I know we'll have the results out on October 31st. just in time to hammer that in those final weeks of the general election. Yep. It's so blatantly transparent. It's a joke. Thank you to everybody who's left comments this morning. We'll see about getting to more of those coming up in just a moment. Let's go here, though. A couple of weeks back, John Phelan wrote about the latest wave of property taxes sweeping across Minnesota. So why is this happening, given that property taxes across Minnesota rose by $1 billion this year alone? You got Dakota County, Washington County, Blaine, St. Paul, Minneapolis, St. Cloud, all added to the list with more to follow. So Dakota County manager Heidi Welsh told KSTP that there was a time when the county had reserves that could dip into to keep tax rates low. But the COVID spending and, this is the key, unfunded state and federal mandates have depleted those reserves. Washington County Commission Chair said the 2.38 levy estimate for the property taxes would have to go to state and federal mandates. Minnesota counties told KSTP that state and federal mandates are putting pressure on taxpayers across Minnesota. I see a theme? I see a theme? I think Isaac hears the theme. I think you hear the theme. You hear the theme, Isaac?
I hear the theme.
There's unfunded state and federal mandates. When those unfunded state and federal mandates came into existence? Oh, yeah, it was through the 2023 DFL trifecta. And then they couldn't be undone because all that the GOP had was a priority in the House, which was enough to stop the horrible taxpayer robbing policy ideas of the left. And they had a slight majority in the House, or in the Senate, but thankfully the GOP could stop it. So what are these mandates and which are pushing property taxes up? John Phelan gets into this. Former Triton School Superintendent Craig Schlichting explained in the Dakota County Independent, an unfunded mandate is a policy or requirement created by legislation without significant funding to cover the cost of implementation. One example of an unfunded mandate is a summer employment for hour wage earners who do not work year-round. For the first 2 years, the state had allocated $135 million toward unemployment payments for these staff, which was not enough to cover the projected expense until 2027, as the money has already been estimated to run out before next summer is over. So this is going to cost the Triton School District about $50,000 each year. Public school employees contribute to a teacher retirement association for all certified and licensed staff. The contribution rate is increasing from 8.75% to 9.5%, with no state aid to help pay for it. For Triton, this is going to cost them an extra $45,000 each year. Paid family medical leave, oh, my favorite, will be paid through the employment taxes, 0.7% on wages, with costs allowed to be shared between employers and employees. There is no state aid to support this increase for employers. For the Triton School District, that increase is going to cost about $28,000 a year. There are several new curriculum requirements for school districts to adopt and implement, including personal finance. There's no state aid to support the cost of those curriculum materials and training. The cost could easily reach $50,000 a year. You see the sense of the theme here? It's really bad. When you start to look at the combined impact of those mandates and the increased expenses as a district, we have no other choice than to cut staff and ask the legislature for help. The cost of the mandates for our district adds up to about $300,000, which is not offset by increases in funding that we received. Deputy County Administrator Dan Lenz told the Star Tribune in November of last year that the county has to cover about $864,000 in higher costs from the state due to the new paid family medical leave law and the changes in the social services program. This is in addition to another $510,000 after federal government passed down more costs, including those relating to the SNAP program, also known as food stamps. These guys, the left has no concern about money. They do not care. They would rather have you living in squalor, having the government support your mediocre lifestyle, having you out of your automobiles, taking public transportation, than to actually go and do the right thing, to put the power of the dollars that you make in your pocket rather than having them go and spend it for you. Paid family medical leave never should have been implemented, was completely and totally unnecessary. There were plenty of opportunities for people to take time off before it was put in place. And now, in part, the reason why these property taxes are going up for everybody and the homeowners, you're just screwed. What do? Move if you can, but who can do that? You just have to just absorb the impact. You think the left cares? You think the DFL cares? No. They'll come up with a new truth council to decide exactly what's to blame for the rise in property taxes across the state. And if they were to do that, I guarantee you, just like the Minnesota Operation Metro Surge Truth Council, they would find something to go and point to Republicans to say it's all their fault. If they just let us spend more money and, do more during the DFL trifecta, we could have avoided all these problems. John Phelan wrote last November regarding this issue. At present, state politicians can have their cake and eat it. Those who passed the tidal wave of unfunded mandates have been able to tout their role in providing paid family medical leave or unemployment insurance for part-time workers, while it has been the people at the county level who have been tasked with finding a way to pay for it. Hiking property taxes, right, unjustly, to a large degree, on the homeowners. This is unfair and is one more way that the historic 2023 trifecta hit affordability for Minnesotans. But see, that's also why you've seen so much garbage, vapid rhetoric coming from people like Peggy Flanagan, like Lamy Klobuchar, regarding the housing crisis that we have. We just need to build more houses. Just build more houses. And the more houses are there, then people will have more options. It can drive down the costs, and people can go and move into this. It'd be great. No, that's not the problem. There's plenty of houses. People can't afford to live in them. People can't afford to buy them, and now they can't afford to live in them either, as they get hit and struck with these ridiculous property taxes, all because of the DFL trifecta. Now, keeping with John Phelan, I've been sitting on this one for a bit. In her gubernatorial campaign, and we talked about this a little bit last week, but John Phelan gets into further details. In her gubernatorial campaign, Senator Amy Klobuchar has made much of the hit Minnesotans have suffered from the expiration of federal health care tax credits. Writing this, after the Trump administration let the health care tax credit expire, Alex Clark's premium jumped to nearly 46%. Nearly $8,000 more for the same plan for his family. Minnesotans shouldn't have to choose between building a future and their family's health care. Oh, it's such a favorite, darling commentary from the left. Minnesotans shouldn't have to choose. We have to choose things all the time. This is curious, writes John Phelan. He says, since these healthcare tax credits expired precisely because Senator Klobuchar and her Democratic colleagues voted for them to expire. She did that. She supported that. As John Phelan wrote last October, when it became apparent the Affordable Care Act of 2010 had completely failed to provide affordable care, the premium tax credit was created in 2014. It provided financial assistance to lower and middle income Americans purchasing health insurance through the ACA marketplace. In 2021, the American Rescue Plan temporarily expanded the tax credits for 2 years, increased the amount of assistance, and eliminated the rule that prevented households with incomes of over 400% of the federal poverty line from qualifying. Listen, if anybody took advantage of this, I don't blame you, but you also need to take responsibility to know that when you took advantage of it, it was also going to be temporary. It was never supposed to be permanent. This was just put in place to deal and offset what we had gone through as a country relating to the COVID pandemic. I should include that. So in 2022, Congress passed the Inflation Reduction Act. As Phelan noted in November, it's a hefty bit of legislation. One of the subtitle C's reads, 2021 through 2025. The bill legislated for these temporary subsidies, enacted in 2021 to be extended, but only to 2025. This was not some secret. The Kaiser Family Foundation reported on this very thing at the time. The Senate passed a 3-year extension, enhanced subsidies for people buying their own health coverage through the ACA, temporary subsidies originally slated to last 2 years, were part of the America Rescue Plan. The enhanced subsidies increase the amount of financial help available and also newly expand subsidies to middle-income people, many of whom were previously priced out of coverage. The bill passed the Senate August 7th of 2022. Every single Republican voted against it. Every single Democrat voted for it, including Amy Klobuchar. Extending the enhanced subsidies would cost $350 billion over 10 years, according to the CBO. CNBC reported last October, adding, hopefully, that's an average of about $35 billion a year. So when Amy Klobuchar talks about how Minnesotans shouldn't have to choose between building a future and their family's health care after the Trump administration let the health care tax credits expire, she only needs to look in the mirror because she did that. She made Minnesotans choose. It's her fault. She's arguing against herself. But why does she go and do this? Because she's banking on ignorance. She's banking on cover from the mainstream media. She's banking on none of this hitting the mainstream and never being questioned about it. Even though it's a completely hypocritical thing for her to go and do. She created that. And why do you think you have the little DFL minion socket wrenches like Jamie Long and Ryan Winkler out there trying to make it all about abortion all of a sudden, just like Operation Metro Surge? Those are the two things that Democrats are suddenly all concerned about. Abortion, which has been settled here in Minnesota. We've made our decisions here, unfortunately, when it comes tragically, pathetically, as evil as they are, part of the DFL trifecta. We have some of the most extreme abortion available here in the state of Minnesota, of which the next governor has no control to go and change. And yet, why do you think they're out there saying, oh, but Lisa Dameth, if she had the chance, she would undo all this, but she wouldn't have the chance any more than Amy Klobuchar would have the chance. They're doing that because they're running cover. They don't want people to see what I just shared with you, what Center of the American Experiment is sharing with you. In the meantime, you have Lisa Dameth and Ryan Wilson out there putting up actual solutions to these problems. To that point, there was a press conference held earlier this week wherein both Ryan Wilson, the lieutenant governor candidate, and Lisa Dameth were at the Capitol talking about their affordability plan. Here's a couple of clips from the gubernatorial candidates.
Right now, the rate Minnesotans pay to register their automobile depends on a formula that almost nobody can really explain. Our plan is simple, though, and this is what you can take with you. $99 to register your car, and it's $99 or less every year thereafter. What that means, the or less, if you're paying less than $99 now, your tab fees would stay that same amount. So there's no formulas, no depreciation schedules, and no surprises.
Also, just after that press conference, Lieutenant Governor candidate Ryan Wilson, who will be joining us on Monday's show, posted this video about their affordability plan.
Ryan Wilson here running for Lieutenant Governor with Speaker of the House Lisa Dameth. We just got finished announcing our affordability plan, talking about how we're going to reduce the taxes and fees on everyday Minnesotans, reducing property taxes, bringing them down after a record $1 billion jump in property taxes this year, caused by the Democrat full total control in 23 and 24. How we're going to bring down car tabs to $99. $99
yes,
or less, and that's something that every Minnesotan's going to be feel again, something that was raised under the Democrats, something the Democrats said they want to quintuple. So we're going to bring relief for Minnesotans. And I just contrast this with Amy Klobuchar, who voted for the largest tax increase on the middle class in history, wanting to let tax cuts expire on the middle class. She voted to let that happen. So don't let politicians like Amy Klobuchar tell you they're for the middle class and then go back to Washington, D.C. and vote against the middle class. She did the same thing with farmers. She stood at Farm Fest and said, I'm with the farmers. Then she voted against them. Said, I'm with the miners, went and voted against them. Lisa has delivered. She delivered property tax relief. She delivered reduction in the car tab fees this session. Obviously, it was a tied legislature. But when she's governor, she is going to lead the effort to bring car tabs down to $99, and to give property tax relief that homeowners are begging for, along with a whole slew of other things. No tax on Social Security, no tax on overtime and tips. It's a great plan. I urge you to check it out at the website. I'm Ryan Wilson, running for Lieutenant Governor with Speaker of the House Lisa Dameth.
And he'll be on the show Monday, I believe, at 7:30. So make a note of that. First, we have to get through Freedom Friday tomorrow, though. So a couple of items. I still have one more story that I want to share with you before we wrap things up today. First off, I want to remind you, when you have a moment, head on over to MINNELEAF.com, MiniLeaf.com. Packaged locally, brewed locally. They're spooky mini leaf tonics, fantastic alternatives to your alcoholic beverages. I swear by the night gummies. Took one last night, got a great night's sleep. Provided me the opportunity to deliver you the hard-hitting, comprehensive, and often humorous commentary that you hear on the John Justice Show, presented by American Experiment. As Isaac shakes his head at me. Also, the Triple Diamond Pain Cream, like I said earlier in the show, Melinda came up. She's like, hey, I need to do a blurb for you. I'm like, what? What are you talking about? She's like, I used the Triple Diamond Pain Cream. I had this horrible neck strain and pain, and I put it on there, and holy cow, it knocked it right out. That's right. It's a testimony. That actually happened. I would not lie to you. Head on over. Taste happy at MINNELEAF.com. Also, I want to thank our amazing sponsor in NutriWave, NutriWave.us. Call Dr. Bob today. Find out about this amazing program. I swear by it, I'm dropping weight. I think I'm down 35 pounds between the first round and the second round here. And this is the thinnest that anybody in my family has ever known me, Melinda or obviously the boys. And I feel, I feel healthier than I have in decades. I do. I feel younger. Head on over to NutriWave.us for more information, or call 952-260-1965 and find out more about this incredible program. And you have a truth metabolic session and a red light therapy valued about $300 available to you while supplies last if you call this morning. So with that, you want to go that route. You don't want to go the route of the GLP-1s. I don't begrudge anybody if they did. That's fine. I'm sure people have taken advantage of it and they've used it well. Unfortunately, we've seen what it's done to Hollywood as of late. I don't know what's happening to some of our favorite actresses, but they just look horrible. There's a new study that's come out, though. This is rather interesting. This is what I wanted to wrap up the show today on. So violence across America has seen a historic decline in the past 2 years. Interesting. Even despite all the stuff that we see on the streets. I don't know whether or not that applies specifically to Minnesota, but just a nationwide total. I wonder how much we're throwing things off. Be that as it may, criminologists are still trying to figure out why violent crime has decreased. One study from earlier this year offered a new theory, though. The new class of weight loss drugs like Ozempic and Wegovy could be partly responsible. A study from Rutgers University sociology professor Daniel Semenza explored the potential relationship between GLP-1 medications, impulsivity, and violent behavior, and found there's certain logic to the theory. One possible explanation comes from research suggesting that GLP-1 medications affect parts of the brain involved in reward and processing of self-regulation. The story's from the New York Post. The benefits of GLP-1s famously fade after the user stopped taking them. In simple terms, they may reduce how strongly people respond to certain rewards or urges. Our findings suggest that someone may still have impulsive tendencies, but those tendencies may be less likely to translate into violent behavior. With 15% of the adult population reporting that they have taken a GLP-1, that's actually a pretty staggering number at 15%. Tens of millions of Americans could find themselves newly restrained. Semenza stresses the research doesn't show a direct correlation between GLP-1s and lowered violent crime nationwide, or even directly improving impulse control, but the potential connection is that impulsivity and alcohol use are well-established risk factors for violence. Research on the drug's long-term effects is still in its infancy, and therefore it's too soon to say whether or not they could reduce crime over time. The important questions for future research: we need studies that follow people over time to examine what happens before, during, and after GLP-1 treatment. This all terrifies me, by the way. the dulling of people's senses. If you've seen the science fiction Joss Whedon film Serenity, based off the television show Firefly, I'm a huge fan of both the series and the movie. This was the plot line. You had the galactic government in a post Earth world where we'd colonized other planets, not unlike my Embark science fiction series. There was, spoiler alert, there was one particular planet that they went to go and visit, and everybody was dead. But everybody had basically died where they stood. There was no war that took place. Well, it was a giant experiment being done by the galactic government where they introduced this formula into the drinking water that was supposed to strip away individuals' proclivity for violence. But it ended up basically neutering the entire society and everybody lost their will to live. So they basically just ended up giving up and just dying. Because they didn't have any emotions. There was no reason to press on. They were all just docile. Now, of course, for the plot of the movie, you have to have an enemy. So that was the one unintended consequence. The other unintended consequence was on one group of individuals that got these packs. It ended up going the opposite direction, and they became overly violent. And they turned into this like zombie space force that they had to fight against. Fantastic film, by the way, but. Yeah. It would explain a lot, though, as to why so many of these prominent, especially actresses, you don't see it as much with men, but these prominent actresses that just look like they're wasting away, they look like Skeletor all of a sudden. You might as well have just gone ahead and cast Ariana Grande in the lead for the new Masters of the Universe film rather than doing CGI on Jared Leto, for crying out loud. So. That was a good movie, by the way, though, Isaac. Masters of the Universe. That was a fun one. I'm going to venture, I guess you haven't seen it.
Yeah, I'll take your word for it.
Okay. Yeah, I got you. All right. Hey, that wraps up Thursday show. Thank you so much for spending time with us this morning. I hope you had as much fun as I did on the show this morning. If you missed any portion of today's broadcast, catch up on the podcast. Download the MixLR app if you haven't done so already. The podcast will be loaded there shortly. Also, the video replays of the show on Facebook and YouTube and on X at MN Think Tank, where you can watch live every single morning. Those podcasts are also posted across all major podcast platforms, and we repost the video up on Rumble as well for those of you that avoid YouTube and or Facebook. Freedom Friday tomorrow. Grace Keating, Katherine Johnson, your hostesses with the mostesses from the American Experiment podcast, will be back from their trip. Sitting on the comfy chairs, we'll also have RNC Committeeman A.K. Kamara, Max Reimer. We'll talk Minnesota State Fair. If you're heading out today, I hope you have yourself a fantastic day. Get caught up on the podcast. And again, thank you so much for spending time with us this morning. Glad you found the show. You can email me overnight, john.justice@americanexperiment.org, or leave us a blast to 612-584-4565. Have yourself a fantastic rest of your Thursday. I'm off to the movies this afternoon. I'm going to see The Dog Stars. You have no idea what I'm talking about, do you, Isaac? New Ridley Scott movie. No. Post-apocalyptic world, a guy and his dog fighting to survive. Very worried about the dog from the trailer. Very concerned. Melinda asked if I was going to look up to see if the dog makes it. And I said, nope, I don't want to spoil myself, but I'm very worried about the dog in this movie. But I'm very much looking forward to this film. So I'll give you a review tomorrow morning for anybody that's interested. All right. I'm done yakking. Have yourself a fantastic day. God bless. I'll talk to you guys tomorrow morning on a Freedom Friday. Bye.
Static waves at dawn, a voice that lingers when night is gone. Twin cities hum with stories spun. John Justice rides the rising sun. See my fizz in a plastic cup. Star Wars dreams keep lifting him up. Costco Isles is sacred ground, where neon shadows spin around.
So that's why there's two projects in there with the show.
Got it. Okay.
Thanks, everybody. You guys are the best.
You're fascinating to talk to.